Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Town of Los Gatos Joint Town Council and Parking Authority meeting of February 3rd, 2014. At this time, I'd like to ask those in attendance this evening to silence your cell phones and other devices. And clerk, will you please call roll?
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Diane McNutt.
Here.
Councilmember Barbara Spector. Councilmember Joe Przynski.
Here.
Vice Mayor Marcia Jensen.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Steve Leonardis.
Here. And as you may have noticed, Councilmember Barbara Spector is unable to attend this evening's council meeting due to an emergency appendectomy she had last night. She is at home recuperating, and she should return to her normal schedule later this week. I would like now to invite Paige Frongzak to come join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm going to say a few words about Paige as she approaches the dais. Paige Frongzak is an 8th grader at Fisher Middle School, has been an honor student each semester since she's been attending Fisher. Her favorite subjects are math and history. She is a leader in trading at Walden West Summer Camp. She volunteers during her spring break building homes in Tijuana, Mexico. She volunteers to help in Sunday school. She is an elementary school teaching assistant. She plays basketball, baseball, softball, soccer, swims, and does track and field and cross country. Paige holds the 6th and 7th grade girls shot and discus school records at Fisher. Paige is the starting center for the undefeated Fisher 8th grade girls basketball team. Paige is a junior lifeguard certified in CPR. And if that isn't enough, she's a big sister to Cameron, who's in attendance this evening, who is 11 years old. Please join me in welcoming Paige to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance this evening.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's give one more round of applause for Paige Frongzak. Very proud of you. Thank you for coming in. I'd like to defer to the town attorney for a closed session report.
Prior to tonight's regular session, council met in closed session to discuss real property negotiations. The property discussed was the property located at.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to...
Located at 14850 Winchester Boulevard. The council took no action that requires reporting under the Brown Act.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to request that the audience fill out speaker cards if you're interested in speaking on any item on the agenda this evening. They are found in the boxes in front of where you're sitting. Next is council and manager reports. Does any member of council have a matter to report? Councilmember Przynski.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I just want to report that on the 30th, I attended a special emergency session of the Association of Bay Area Governments in Oakland regarding litigation directed at the Planned Bay Area.
Thank you. Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. On January 22nd, I attended the Santa Clara Valley Water Commission, where the obvious topic was the drought and our level of water reserves. They also gave us some information that's available on their website about water conservation efforts and some new rebate programs. For example, there's a new rebate available if you'd like to install a gray water laundry to landscaping system.
Thank you. Manager matters.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, 3 items. First, the library faced an unexpected power outage last Friday morning, and we actually had to close for the afternoon. but with staff and our contractors working till 10 p.m. that night, we were able to replace the main electrical circuit breaker, and the library operated as normal for the rest of the weekend. So many thanks to Parks and Public Works staff and library staff for quickly responding to that incident. Second, the council will see in the chambers, we have our newest art exhibit up. This is once again the high school advanced art class is back showing the work of their students, and this is a collaboration with the museums of Los Gatos, and the opening artist reception is scheduled for February 13th here in the chambers. Last, I would like to invite Christina Gilmore, Assistant to the Town Manager, to provide an update on today's implementation of our single-use bag ordinance.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Did you know that today the Town of Los Gatos single-use carryout bag ordinance went into effect? The ordinance applies to all retail and grocery stores except for restaurants, nonprofit charitable thrifts, and food pantries. Retail stores may provide a recycled paper bag or reusable bag for 10 cents per bag. Customers may bring a reusable bag when shopping to avoid the bag charge. Stores keep the 10-cent bag charge and can exempt customers paying with WIC, CalFresh, SNAP, or other food stamp cards. Protective bags without handles may be provided at no charge for meat, produce, prescriptions, greeting cards, or bulk items. For more information about the single-use carryout bag ordinance, you can visit the town's website at www.losgatos.ca.gov/reusable bags, or you can send an email to reusablebags@losgatos.ca.gov or call the town offices at 354-6834. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gilmore. Next on our agenda is our consent calendar. Does any member of council wish to pull an item? Seeing none, does any member of the public wish to pull an item from the consent calendar? Seeing none, I'd look to the council for a motion. Vice Mayor?
I'd like to move approval of our consent calendar consisting of items number 1, 2, and 3 with all of the terms and conditions as contained in our staff reports.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Carries unanimously. Next on our agenda is verbal communications. You have up to 3 minutes to speak on any item that is not on the agenda. If you'd like to speak, please fill out one of the cards in front of you. And we have one card so far, which is Dale Miller. You please come forward.
Dale Miller, 115 Newell Court. I'm glad you guys are all sitting down because normally I'm here to complain about something. Actually, I'm here to thank you for having the person who bought the Elks Club property actually talk to the members and the neighbors about their thoughts and plans for the property. And I think at this point, the first meeting was very, very well received by the neighbors. We're anxious to see that they continue with what they've talked about by building 4 single-family units. And I just want to thank you for whoever suggested they talk to the neighbors ahead of time. It was very well received. The neighborhood turned out very well, and I think it was a very cordial meeting, and we look forward to continuing to work with the developer for what they plan to do with that property.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Any other speakers this evening? Seeing none, we'll be moving on to our first public hearing, which is Architecture and Site Application S13-049, property location 134 Loma Alta Avenue, property owner Donald Prolo, appellant Leslie Logan. We're going to consider an appeal of the decision of the Planning Commission approving a request to demolish a pre-1941 single-family residence and construct a new single-family residence on property zoned R18. And we have a staff report. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a question, maybe for Mr. Larson and Mr. Schultz. 10 minutes before the meeting started, we received a desk item, 2 desk items. One is 53 pages, and one is 9 pages for a total of 62. It's very detailed, and I am not one to complain about getting detailed things at the last minute, but I don't think I've ever gotten 62 pages. So I wonder if, given the density and the length and the information contained in that item, it's appropriate to, if one were to want to make a motion to continue it prior to taking testimony.
I will look to the clerk for confirmation. I don't believe these were distributed as traditional desk items. They're copies of the presentation that one of the presenters wants to use tonight, and they're giving you a copy of the presentation, and the other is a packet of signatures of individuals they represent or in support of that position. Both were provided by the appellant tonight, not as through the desk item process.
Okay, if it truly is a copy of the presentation, I look forward to it being completed in its time limit.
All right. Thank you. Then moving on to our staff report, Ms. Savage.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. On October 9th, 2013, the applicant presented an application to demolish an existing single-family residence and construct a new single-family residence. Concerns were raised by both the neighbors and the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission directed the applicant to redesign the project. In December 2013, the applicant came back to the Planning Commission with a revised design, and the Planning Commission approved the project with additional conditions. In December, the project was appealed. The appellant claims that solar access and privacy concerns were not addressed through the second-story mass of the master bedroom over the covered patio, as well as considerations and options to reduce that square footage. The appellant also claims that there was inadequate information presented for the heights of the building. This concludes staff presentation, and staff is available for any questions.
Look to council for questions. Seeing none. At this time, I'd like to call up the appellant to speak. You have 10 minutes.
You good? Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Good evening. My name is Leslie Logan. I live adjacent to the property on the uphill side at 136 Loma Alta Avenue. In 1994, we purchased my husband's childhood home, which has been in the Logan family residence for almost 50 years. We feel very blessed to live in this quaint and historic neighborhood. It's so close to the downtown village with friendly and supportive neighbors. This is now the third hearing on this property. The process has been difficult and incredibly stressful, especially the appeal. Unfortunately, I find that I must point out the errors and faulty conclusions of the planning commissioners and others. This is troublesome for me. I do not believe that it was malicious or intentional. We all make mistakes, and in many cases, the information provided was inaccurate or misleading. I truly believe these people give their time to make our town the best it can be, but I also must do what I believe is right to preserve my neighborhood, and that means that I must point out these errors. We have very little time, as you know, so I've structured the packet of information so you can follow along with the presentation. In your packet, you will find the slides, followed by the pages of supporting arguments, materials, examples, and excerpts. So I'll begin. We certainly appreciate Mr. Prolo's intention to improve the property, that he has left vacant, stripped of mature landscape plants and in disrepair for over a year now. It is certainly time to eliminate the blight that now exists in our neighborhood as a result. So why are we here? What do we want? Compromise. Reasonable, fair compromise. We will return to these points, but I want you to understand where we're going. We want to limit the size of the second story, increase privacy on the second story windows, allow only French doors on the first floor, and deed restrict the garage with the half bath. If you look at the neighborhood support packets, you will see that we have quite a few neighbors, 21 in all, who support this compromise. In fact, there are 5 people who previously signed in support of Mr. Prolo's design, then after learning more have now asked you to require that compromise. We have essentially, 9 issues, errors, or additional information that justify a grant of appeal. They are listed for you on page 3, and I'm going to go through each of them. Hopefully. The planning commissioners incorrectly assumed that our adjacent home is a 2-story house. That is not accurate. According to town code, it is a 1-story house with a basement. Although built into a slope, you can see at the highest point above the grade in one corner, the finished floor is just 4 feet and therefore considered a 1-story home. There were, I assume, inadvertent errors in the staff report and in Mr. Prolo's materials that contributed to the confusion. This led to the flawed conclusions about neighborhood compatibility, especially in terms of height, bulk, and scale. The Planning Commission made an error by giving too much weight to houses that were not in the immediate neighborhood in their consideration of compatibility. Mr. Prolo's assertion that 15 houses are in the immediate neighborhood was not correct. The staff report and project file both clearly define the immediate neighborhood as 8 lots. This was a critical error because at least 5 of the design guidelines emphasize the priority directly to be given to the immediate neighborhood very clearly, such as the greatest attention will be given to the immediate neighborhood, and the others are in your packet. If you look at the appropriate houses in our immediate neighborhood, you see that it is predominantly 1-story with 2 examples of 1+2-story homes. It serves to follow that if the wrong houses were included in the premise, then the conclusion of compatibility in terms of form, mass, height, bulk, scale, privacy, and solar access are also flawed. See the associated design guidelines with that on page 10. Commissioner O'Donnell made a statement that the project is not larger than the others in the neighborhood. This is clearly false. The staff report clearly states this several times, and it was their recommendation to deny the project because it was indeed the largest. This error regarding the relative square footage of the project sets a dangerous precedent. While each project should be judged in its own merit, the entire process is focused on neighborhood compatibility, which is essentially what already exists in the immediate neighborhood. If you allow it, more will come. The consulting architect's detailed assessment on pages 13 and 14 of your packet included an error, actually a couple, referring to 138 Loma Alta as a 1-story when it is in fact a 1+2, only adding to the confusion. Both of the adjacent homes have been remodeled to significantly increase square footage without negative impacts to the neighbors. Understanding how this was achieved for the most relevant homes near the project is very important to be able to properly apply the design guidelines that relate to the features that make the home compatible, but the Commission did not investigate this information. 136 Loma Alta was remodeled about 15 years ago to incorporate a basement with a water abatement system, and the building did not change. 132 Loma Alta was originally almost a duplicate of this project home in size and layout, and yet when the home was remodeled by Steve Howard, he indicated that he kept it 1-story precisely because of the lack of negative impacts and a smoother application process. The result is a lovely home that preserves the Spanish eclectic charm in our neighborhood. In the end, because the Planning Commission did not consider the clear distinction between a full 2-story and a 1+2, they missed the opportunity to find the appropriate compromise that would make the project most compatible in our neighborhood. Adding to the misconception about story height of the immediate neighborhood homes, the project plans includes a streetscape that, although it is noted no scale, significantly overstates the height of the 2-story portion of the 1 and 2-story at 138, which is next to me, making it look more like a full 2-story. Because the Planning Commission did not recognize the clear distinction between a 2-story and a 1+2 home in their deliberation of neighborhood compatibility, they struggled to find compromise, even though they acknowledged that the adjacent neighbors were negatively impacted. There is a compromise about which information is readily available that is workable, acceptable, and compatible. It's a 1+2. Mr. Prolo used comparisons of photos of story poles on the original design to display how much the design has changed. The original story poles and the new story poles are not based on the same portion. The first one's included the eaves, so the visual change is 2 feet larger than it actually is. Reducing the overall bulk and mass of the second story by limiting its size is based on Mr. Prolo's own architect's suggestion and assertion that doing so would open up the privacy, light, and view for the adjacent neighbors. We were taken by surprise when the redesigned home actually increased the length of the second story and thus negative impacts. There are additional items in our request that we can go through if you have any questions, but they were also discussed at previous meetings. These things will make the home more compatible for the immediate neighborhood and prevent the dangerous precedent that is a concern for so many of our neighbors. We want him to enjoy a large home in what I consider the best neighborhood in Los Gatos. Our suggestions are based on the suggestions of the applicant's own architect, and we are confident that he will be able to incorporate these changes to create a design that allows Mr. Prolo to retain a comfortable backyard area without sacrificing all of the light, privacy, sky views for the adjacent neighbors. Mr. Prolo has often referred to this project as his dream home. We want him to live out his dreams, but why does it need to be our nightmare? We've given you several specific key points of error to justify the appeal and more than 30 pages of support materials to validate our assertions and take you through the logic of our arguments with the support of many of our neighbors. We ask you to help us preserve the things that make Loma Alta such a wonderful neighborhood.
Hi, I live next door to 134 Loma Alta, 132. This is our daughter's bedroom taken in December with the sun streaming through the windows. The second picture shows the impact of the first and second stories on the solar access. As you can see with the proposed plan, she will lose direct sunlight with one story, but with the second story, she will get virtually no direct sunlight at all. After watching the sun rise over many days and looking through the windows of the story poles, we have calculated that at the time the sun has trajectory onto this side of the house, she will lose 10% of sunlight hours with a single story and 80% of sunlight hours with a two-story. And this room is fairly typical of all of the rooms along this side of the house. There are 4 bedrooms along this side of the house. This picture is a picture of a shadow study provided by Mr. Prolo's architect. The fence is actually about 6 to 8 inches lower than indicated there. It clearly shows the impact of the second story, especially in the winter months when it covers even the few skylights we have. The lower picture shows when the sun is highest in the sky and will be worse every day after that and will very quickly impinge onto the windows. The following slide shows the plan view shadow study, which again shows that even when the sun is highest in the sky, it will shade all of that side of our house. The members of the commission acknowledged that there was a loss of solar access with the current proposal. However, as Leslie outlined earlier, the commissioners used an incorrect immediate neighborhood analysis as a basis for their decision and did not give sufficient weight to the fact that the proposal does not meet the design guidelines. The illustration taken from the design guidelines showing what should be avoided is very similar to the shadow study graphic I presented earlier, which is our current reality with this proposal. The Commission did not consider alternative solutions which would at least make the situation better for us. When we moved to California, we fell in love with Los Gatos. It is an older town full of character. We specifically chose a neighborhood that was close to both the schools and downtown and wanted somewhere to live that has the charm than you find in older, more established neighborhoods. We settled on the house we live in because it fulfilled these most important requirements. It's a neighborhood of smaller lots, predominantly single homes, and we had no reason to anticipate any development next door.
Your time is up. Thank you.
Can I use 3 minutes of my
There will-
time because I'm not the actual applicant?
There will-
Is that possible? Or even just like half of that, because that's all I need.
There will be some time for a rebuttal, so you could come back up after the other speaker has a chance to speak. You get 5 additional minutes for that.
I can't.
Vice Mayor?
Just for the record, I assume you're Karen Eventon? Thank you.
Sorry. Okay.
Right, thank you. I'd like to call up the applicant.
Can I speak as
Should I start? Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members. I will give you a brief history of my project and explain why I believe the appeal before you has no merit. I purchased the property in December of 2012. I was attracted to the property because the alley allows for the garage to be located in the back, leaving room for a reasonable sized yard with the house located in the front. I applied for a permit to demolish the existing house because its condition is not suitable for remodeling. The town's Historic Preservation Committee reviewed the request and unanimously recommended approval. They concluded that the existing building was not historically significant, but that they preferred that the new house be constructed in a Spanish colonial revival style. My first design for my new home was presented to the Planning Commission in October 2013. It was a Spanish colonial revival style design, which met all of the town's planning and zoning guidelines and did not require a single exception or variance. Some of my neighbors came to the meeting to voice some concerns they had regarding the design of my house. The Planning Commission asked me to meet with my neighbors again and redesign my home to address the concerns brought up. Before I started the redesign, I thoroughly studied the residential design guidelines and met with many of my neighbors. With this information, I proceeded to completely redesign my home. This involves setting the second floor back from the first floor in the front, reducing the square footage of the second floor, reducing the height of the house, moving the second store away from both of my neighbors' houses, including a notched area on the second floor that faces 132 Loma Alta to allow as much solar access as possible to their house, and reducing the full bath to a half bath in the garage. Chris Spalding, my architect, first drew the house with these modifications in Spanish style, but the new geometry seemed to be aesthetically incompatible with the original Spanish style. The second floor setbacks were more compatible with craftsman style architecture, so Chris sketched the new design in craftsman style for comparison. I sent both sketches into the town for guidance on which way to proceed, and the town responded that I proceed with the craftsman style house. This is why we completed the redesign in a craftsman style. I met with my neighbors again to share with them the new design, including the solar impact study. On December 11th, I returned to the Planning Commission with the new design and responses to the requests. My new plan was approved by a vote 5-2. I have a PowerPoint presentation now. So this is the new design. This was the original design and the story poles. Mrs. Logan was, originally when I put up the story poles, I had the eaves included. And the second time I did it, I was told that I'm not supposed to include the eaves, so that's what happened going from that one to that one. This is the redesign, and this is an aerial view of my property, and the Evandens is the red one on the top, and the Logan's is right below. Mine is in the center, and the Logan's is right under it in this photo. This is a view of the Evandens property from my property, a view of the Logan's property from my property, and this is what the Planning Commission had requested in October 9th, and then I completed before the December 11th meeting, meet with the neighbors, revise the plans, provide a shadow study showing a one-story versus a two-story, reference the residential design guidelines to show the proposed design meets the guidelines, specifically regarding a second-story addition, show how the architecture style fits with the neighborhood. I did all of those. This was the neighborhood that I basically found the houses that I could see from my lot and they could see from their lot, my house. This is the second story setbacks. As you can see, there's plenty of room on both sides, and in the front it's set back 9 foot 4 inches, and I notched out the side there to get as much possible light for the Evandens. These are the shadow studies I think you've seen. This is the neighborhood support that I got. Had quite a bit of support in the close neighbors. And in summary, it meets all the town's zoning regulation and guidelines. I'm not asking for any variances, has been redesigned to address comments made by immediate neighbors regarding previous design, is compatible with the neighborhood in mass, bulk, FAR, and square footage. Additionally, the town's consulting architect states the proposed home is modest in scale and well-designed. The craftsman style with a large front porch and second floor setbacks will reinforce the first floor feel of the front facade and relate well in scale to the adjacent one-story homes. The home, as proposed, should fit comfortably into the neighborhood and relate to both the one-story and the larger nearby two-story homes in the neighborhood. I believe that the appeal of the Planning Commission's approval is without merit. The following is my response to the appeal, which mirrors that of the staff report. 1, Mrs. Logan wrote, inadequate consideration was given to the massing square footage of the second-story master bedroom above the covered porch area, which negatively impacts solar access and privacy for 132 Loma Alta. The staff report states the Planning Commission specifically discussed the master bedroom, the massing square footage of the second floor, and the rationale behind the design. 2, Mrs. Logan wrote, the commission did not adequately consider options to reduce second-story square footage to reduce negative impacts to the solar access and privacy of 132 Loma Alta. As the staff report states, the Planning Commission considered the reduction in second-story square footage, relocation of portions of the second story, and reconfiguration of the second story proposed by the applicant to increase solar access for the neighboring property. 3, Mrs. Logan wrote, the applicant provided misleading information regarding the building heights in the immediate neighborhood as a basis for the neighborhood compatibility. As the staff report states, the applicant provided streetscapes for the immediate neighborhood. In addition, the applicant provided photos of the neighborhood, including photos of with the story poles of the proposed project. I ask you to deny the appeal as my home does not involve a policy issue. There is no new information being presented, and as I have stated above, the Planning Commission did not err. In closing, I want to say that I have worked hard to please the neighbors and to build a home that will fit nicely into the neighborhood. My home meets all of Los Gatos' rules, regulations, and guidelines. I am not asking for a variance. I have met with the neighbors to hear their concerns and have spent significant time, money, and energy redesigning my home to lessen the impacts on my neighbors. I look forward to building my home and becoming part of the Los Gatos community. Thank you, and I am open to any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Polo. Questions from council? Seeing none, you may take a seat, and I'd like to invite up anyone who wishes to speak on this matter to please fill out a speaker card. The first is Christopher Evenden. Please come forward. You have 3 minutes.
Numbers are all public record. I think you've probably seen them before. Thank you. Chris Evenden, 132.
Please speak into the microphone if you would.
Sure. Chris Evenden, 132 Loma Alta Avenue. I'm here to talk about the character of the neighborhood and the compatibility of the proposed development. None of the 8 houses are in the area are 2-story. 2 are classed as 1 plus 2 stories, defined by the second story being significantly smaller than the first. The proposed home would be the only 2-story home in the immediate neighborhood. At the last hearing, Commissioner Seoc said that even if 134 Loma Alta were a 1-story, it would not give him the solar access that they are asking for. It would be better, but not necessarily the answer either. Firstly, that's not true. We've made it very clear that we're willing to compromise on this. We'll be giving up plenty of sunlight should a single-story house be built that close to our house, but we understand the need for compromise. Secondly, the Commissioner appears to be arguing that we shouldn't try for better because perfect isn't attainable. I respectfully disagree. Better is worth compromising for. I've added an average for the key numbers of the table to better understand the character of the neighborhood. And the character is, I assume, part of what attracted Mr. Prolo to the neighborhood in the first place. It's relatively small, typically single-story houses. You can see that Mr. Prolo's house is a whole 1/3 bigger than the baseline for the neighborhood. That's a huge difference. If I were a third taller than I am now, I would be 8 feet tall. You can, but that doesn't tell the whole story. The square footage is a great proxy for what we're really trying to measure, the bulk of the building. The square footage is a real number, a definite fact that we measured and written down, but it omits the porch. In most homes, that doesn't matter because the porch is a trivial impact on its bulk. But here we have a 330 square foot porch that raises the whole back of the house onto a new second floor. If you perform the relevant calculation of the compatibility of the home with the neighborhood, you'll discover that it's now actually over 1.5 times the size of the average house, a completely different class of dwelling. If I were 1.5 times as tall as I am now, I'd be 9 feet tall and playing for the Warriors. It's worth noting that this calculation also ignores the garage, which is also on the large side for the neighborhood. I've made conservative assumptions, but it's clear that the planned home would be 1.5 times bigger than the baseline and the only one with a second story. Given this data, it's not hard to see why staff has twice recommended denial. Commissioner Bourgeois conceded that the porch is indeed adding bulk to the second story of the house, but then didn't follow through that thought to its conclusion, which is that covered porches should be part of the calculation. This sets an interesting precedent. If these contentions are correct, anyone in the area can put a 450 square foot porch at the back of the house and raise 450 square foot of rooms above that, building a new second floor. It increases the size of their yard and improves their light and views, albeit to the detriment of everyone around them in terms of privacy, views, and light. Inevitably, other neighbors will do the same. It's an opportunity too good to miss, and soon the character of the area has changed into something completely new. But compatible homes can be developed without sacrificing the character of the neighborhood. The Logans added a floor below their existing house. The developer of our home gave up yard space to build a compatible family home. We knew this before we bought and certainly expected other developers to have, if not the same sensitivities, then at least to be operating under the same set of rules. I'll end by asking this question. If the residential design guidelines are not here to help by preserving the neighborhood, then what are they for?
Thank you, Mr. Evenden. Next speaker is Bess Hilliard.
Hi, my name is Bess Hilliard. I live at 201 Johnson, and I'm also a residential architect that does a lot of work here in the city of Los Gatos, town, I guess. I wanted to stand up and speak in support of the current proposal that's in front of you and encourage you guys to approve the recommendation and findings of the planning department and the consulting architect. It's a little difficult as a neighbor because it's a pretty contentious project in the neighborhood, depending upon who you talk to. But I do believe that this proposal and the supporting documents, the story polls, does fit within the guidelines, the design guidelines as set forth in the neighborhood for the town. I also have a professional concern about the council potentially setting a precedent where it can be swayed to overreach beyond the established guidelines based upon the persistence of only a few neighbors.
Thank you. Next speaker is Steve Piasecki.
Thank you, and good evening, Town Council members. My name is Steve Piasecki. I live at 205 Johnson Avenue, directly behind the subject property. The Planning Commission failed to consider a reasonable alternative that will achieve 90% of what the applicant wants and 90% of what the neighbors want. You have what is a rare opportunity in local government to have a win-win. This doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. You can, with some slight compromises, achieve a win-win. Whether you characterize it as an error of the Planning Commission or new information doesn't really matter to me. In December 2013, I relayed my thoughts to the applicant. I tried to coach him in terms of getting along with the neighbors and coming up with a design that they would like and he would like. And what I told him was go for the things that are obvious. The oversized outdoor room, the 4 bedrooms on the second floor. These are things that are not very common. I have a house with 3 bedrooms on the second floor and it's quite ample. It's about the same size and I have a 2-story. He came back with slightly greater side setbacks, which really doesn't help the massing that much, and it doesn't help the shadowing that much. I suggested that he look at, again, the second story and the outdoor room. And to be quite honest, I really don't care if he has an outdoor room or 4 bedrooms, as long as these elements do not increase the envelope and massing of the second story. Have him put them on the first floor. And I suggest that he actually run that first floor further along the upslope side of the property. So I'm suggesting to the town council that you uphold the appeal, citing new information, and approve the application, with the restrictions on the first and second story envelope setbacks to match those that he has currently, except for on the second floor that he be limited to no more than 25 feet of length on either the east or west side. I'm less generous than my neighbors are, perhaps. I think 25 feet is a nice number. That is more than enough room for a master bedroom suite with a bath and or 2 bedrooms. You can move the 4th bedroom downstairs, run along the upslope side of the property, and I suggest that the second story windows facing east or west be either clear story or obscured glass, something pretty consistent with what the town has done in many other applications. Again, you get a win-win, 90% of what the applicant wants, 90% of what the neighbors want, and we can move ahead without a zero-sum game. So any questions?
Questions? Thank you. Next speaker is John Shepherdson.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, and other council members. I have This is the notice of intent to circulate petition on the Albright matter, and I've underlined one of the items was which this petition is brought by Ms. Logan, and they're arguing that the ballot is offering something that's consistent and compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. And so what she argued was that 65 and 50-foot tall buildings adjacent to 2-story homes was compatible. And so I find it ironic that she is now objecting to a second story next to hers but one doesn't want to be, I think it's best to try and approach this in a high road. Something I learned from Judge Manukian when I was in court one day, it's better to take the high road. And so I would suggest that the council simply apply the standards that exist. And I do want to applaud the process that's taking place here. And that is that we have, before elected officials, an opportunity to an appeal, to question the Planning Commission's decision. And I find that ironic because this petition on the Albright project would take away this power from our elected officials. And so if we applied what this petition calls for, if we vote for it, then Ms. Logan would not be allowed to appeal. And so I think that the process is healthy for the town and the citizenry, irrespective of our particular views on the project, that we have this process where we can speak publicly and we can have public input and our elected officials can consider our arguments and we have an open decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shepherdson. That's the last public speaker card. At this time, I would like to invite the applicant up. We got one more?
Speak? I'm
sure.
Sorry, I didn't hand that in. Jim Lyon, 239 Johnson Avenue. Mr. Mayor, council members, it's been a long time since I've been in the council chambers, about 12 years since I sat on the Planning Commission. And it's interesting to look at this, having come back from overseas and seen the changes to my town. And what is a shock to me is the number of errors that our Planning Commission has made in replacement buildings for demolitions. I look at my own street where 2 new houses have gone on Johnson Avenue that are not compatible with the neighborhood. And what I'm seeing here is another one. Basically, going back to the minutes of the Historic Preservation Commission where they talk about the style of the home being a Spanish eclectic, it was my understanding as a planning commissioner that in the residential design guidelines, you were supposed to have an in-kind replacement when you were looking at a demolition of a historic home. That doesn't seem to be happening here. What we have is a house that is significantly larger and a completely different style. If you look at the surrounding neighborhood, it is all single-story homes, and especially that immediate surrounding neighborhood, the three on either side and the three across the street. And in fact, if you go all the way from Crossway up to the top of the hill, everything on that right side of Loma Alta reads as a single-story house. I think there is an opportunity here with this house for a redesign. I would recommend that you do send it back to the commission and back to staff for a redesign. I think some of the other folks here have talked about like this covered porch area, creating mass and bulk in the house, raising up the second story. And you just see code violations coming in the future with that covered porch being enclosed as living space. So let's send this back to the Planning Commission and to staff to do a redesign and be consistent with the guidelines that we have put in place in the town. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further speakers on this matter? Seeing none, I'd like to invite the applicant up to rebut what was said. You have 5 minutes if you'd like to speak.
Well, there was a lot said. I don't know how much of it was true. I didn't follow some of it, but I don't have any variances. I think the house is very appropriate for the neighborhood. It looks like most houses in Los Gatos, and I'm sorry that some of the neighbors have issues with it still, but I really did my best to try to please everyone, and I put a lot of effort into the redesigns and going and talking to everyone and in trying to solve the problems as much as I possibly could. So yeah, that's pretty much where we're at. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, the appellant has 5 minutes to also rebut.
Hi. Firstly, I want to apologize for the length of our presentation, and I'm very thankful I have these extra 5 minutes at the end as a rebuttal. I think I was just saying how much we loved Los Gatos and why we moved here. We moved here into this neighborhood with smaller lots with predominantly single-story homes. We had no reason to anticipate that any development next door would include a two-story home, as none existed in the immediate neighborhood, and we were aware of the controls the town of Los Gatos puts on construction in order to preserve its unique and delightful neighborhoods. Mr. Prolo has a list of requirements that do not describe any of the houses in the immediate neighborhood: a big yard, a full two-story house, a large covered porch, 3 bedrooms on the second floor, and a large double garage with a bathroom attached. The cumulative impact of these requirements creates overmassing on the second floor and a design that is incompatible with the immediate neighborhood. This design has a detrimental impact on the existing homes and is not in line with the design guidelines with regards to compatibility, solar access, and privacy. What we are asking for is a real and fair compromise that respects the neighbors, but also allows Mr. Prolo to build a wonderful home in a neighborhood where the benefits are so much more than the room configuration of the house. For these reasons, we support the solution outlined earlier by Leslie of a 1+2 story home where the second floor is at the front of the house and the first floor extends further back into the lot on the uphill side. We will still be significantly impacted with this solution, but it is a fairer solution that addresses the concerns of all involved. I have drawn a diagram which is for illustrative purposes only and shows the very reasonable compromise that we are proposing, and also that Steve Piasecki referred to as well, which looks at having the second story mass reduced and maintained at the front of the house, and the side backs, the side setbacks and the front setbacks the same. We have spoken to the neighbors about this issue, and it's not just a few neighbors, it's the majority of the neighbors, and a number of the neighbors who Mr. Prolo spoke to, just showing him the attractive front facade of the house, who signed his approval. Once they understood more the issues that were at hand, they actually reversed their support, and they believe that we have put forward a solution that is a real and fair compromise for everyone involved. And they were all the neighbors who live in the very close proximity to our house now. When Mr. Prolo talked about the compromise that he made with the second story setbacks, it actually was only a reduction of 6% of the total mass on the second floor. And in fact, his architect in October had actually made a suggestion at the Planning Commission meeting that maybe he could move the master bedroom down, and it would actually reduce, and he would able to make a very amenable home, and it would reduce the second floor massing by 30%. And I know Mr. Prolo then said that he did not want to have that because he wanted all of his bedrooms on the second floor. Well, none of the houses have in the immediate neighborhood have all of their bedrooms on the second floor. Even there's the 1+2 houses have only 2 bedrooms on the second floor and other bedrooms on the first floor. So those wishes are really not compatible with the immediate neighborhood. I'm going to hand over to Leslie now to finish off the last few comments.
So I believe that we have provided ample evidence, probably too much considering it's 60 pages, that do suggest that there were errors in the information presented. The Planning Commission did make errors, as well as the applicant in some of the material that he provided. The change that he did make just didn't help. In fact, for us on the uphill side, it made it worse. He moved it in a foot, maybe a little bit more, but what he did is he lengthened the building, and so it completely blocks our views now. And it lengthens the shadowing on the Evendens home. So we're asking for that first floor square footage to be put on our side of the property so that we can preserve the shadowing, and eliminate the shadowing for the people that live down the hill. He also noted that, the length of our house from the aerial view is very long, but actually that's a deck in the back. And so there's 20 feet of that roof is a deck. Again, I question that he thoroughly studied the design guidelines, as I've provided you with plenty of information where the design guidelines conflict with these plans. Thank you.
Thank you. So at this time, we are going to close the public hearing on this item, and I want to ask first of my fellow council members for disclosures. Councilmember Brzezinski.
Yes, I was able to speak to the applicant and also visit the property in the applicant's presence, and I've done a couple of visits since then, and the latest was this evening, just to kind of get a feel for the entire neighborhood.
Vice Mayor.
I met with Mr. Prolo and his representative, Ms. Benjamin, at his property pursuant to his request.
I spoke with Mr. Prolo over the phone, and I also visited the site.
I visited the site twice and met with Mr. Prolo.
At this time, I'd like to ask council if they have any questions or would like to make a motion. Questions of staff or discussion? Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had one question of staff at this time. I remember the Planning Commission talking about the bathroom in the garage and their concern about that potentially being used as a living area. Can you tell us what the restriction is on that?
The applicant, The applicant did reduce the bathroom from a full bath to a half bath in the revised design. So at this point, it's just a toilet and a sink. There is no deed restriction condition currently placed on the project, but the lot is too small for it to be converted into a second unit.
Thank you.
Further questions? Further discussion? Seeing none. Motion. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will try a motion. My motion would be to deny the appeal. And the reason is that I can't find under the ordinance that governs how the town council views appeals that, number one, the planning commission did anything outside of its discretion, or number two, that there's any real new information that wasn't available at the time of the hearing. And the real question that's been presented tonight by the appellant is, did the Planning Commission make an error? And in reviewing the two Planning Commission meetings and having actually walked Loma Alta as part of the preparation and writing of the residential design guidelines, the one thing that I concluded when I walked that neighborhood so many times is that if there's a single unifying thing about the neighborhood, is that it's different. It's quite very eclectic. The houses are all very different. I have some disappointment in that there is a Spanish style that's going to be replaced by a craftsman. The Historic Preservation Committee did ask for a Spanish style, so it's disappointing that our town architect would approve a craftsman given that recommendation. However, I don't think that there's been anything pointed out that indicates that the Planning Commission made an error versus reached a conclusion different than that being advocated by the appellant. The applicant did come back with a different design. He did do what the Planning Commission asked. He did reduce the size. The Planning Commission carefully considered all of the issues at both of its meetings and concluded, I think rightly so, that the proposed project does meet the residential design guidelines. And so for that reason, my motion would be to deny the appeal and adopt the conditions of improvement that are in our attachment to our staff report. I believe it's attachment 9.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
I'll second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Passes unanimously. Moving on to other business. We have to adopt a resolution establishing a housing element advisory board for the 2014 through 2022 housing element update. And our staff report will be provided by Erwin Ordonez, our senior planner.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Erwin Ordonez from Community Development. What you have before you this evening, as you noted, is a resolution for adoption of for establishment of a housing element advisory board. As you know, from the council's past work, the housing element, the current housing element ended in December, and with the state mandates, we're mandated to go ahead and adopt a new housing element this year by the end of the year. As part of the guidance from the state is recommending that we maximize public outreach as part of the upcoming housing element update process. The town staff has already distributed a request for proposals for consultants to assist with that work. And as part of the upcoming housing element update, staff has before you this evening the resolution that's recommending that the council establish a board comprised of the general plan committee plus 4 residents to provide additional input for the preparation of that document. Also, as part of your presentation, staff would like to note that there's another alternative, that if council chooses, council can also define the advisory board either to increase or decrease its members through the inclusion or exclusion of either council members or planning commissioners and other and other members of the public. The General Plan Committee currently is comprised of 2 council members and 3 planning commissioners. You also have members from the business community and the Community Services Commission. And so what staff is recommending is basically to add 4 additional members to that to create a body that's very similar to the ad hoc committee for the North 40 specific plan. What you see before you in this slide are the 2 alternatives, and this concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Ordonez. Are there any questions? Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Ordonez. My question is, if we were to decide on the second alternative, would anything that was determined through that alternative have to go through the General Plan Commission and the Planning Commission such that it may elongate the process?
Yes, one advantage of what staff is recommending is that if the council were to go ahead and empower the full General Plan Commission and add to it, it would not necessitate having to go through the General Plan Committee. However, if you were to take away members from the General Plan Committee, the basic consistency, you would probably have to do some sort of referral back to the General Plan Committee for a recommendation on the General Plan policy item.
Further questions? Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm concerned about the timing that staff is recommending because the goal would be to have interviews of potential board members in advance of March 3rd. I don't quite understand, since it's February 3rd, we don't move at the speed of light on anything. So 30 days to get this organized, get it publicized in the community, get applications in with enough time. I don't see how that's even possible. So is there an alternate timeline that you would recommend?
Yes, and staff anticipated this question, so we actually put together a tentative schedule for you. So as you can see here, we've already distributed the RFP for the housing element consultant. And if council were to go ahead and establish the board this evening, we will actually go ahead and advertise and sort of leverage what we're doing already for the other vacancies on the boards and commissions for the town. And we can actually go ahead and on March 17th, take multiple actions to interview applicants in the early evening, do your council appointment, and also approve the consultant for the housing element. And we can actually have the board empowered and start meeting at the end of March and still get in its 8 meetings and maybe an additional public meeting. And hopefully, if they conclude all their work, we can have a draft housing element completed in August, get started on the environmental reviews just in time for September Planning Commission and council review in October.
Right. So the item that's listed, advertisement for volunteers on Valentine's Day, what did you have in mind there?
That basically leverages the town's existing policy of advertising things in the local paper and the normal process that the clerk uses.
So if we were to follow this, my strong recommendation would be that we advertise in 2 issues, because that's a beginning of a 3-day weekend to begin with. Secondly, with the new distribution scheme of the weekly, not everybody's quite found it yet, and I'm not sure everybody ever will. So I think we're going to have to change our strategy a little bit and figure out how to be more inclusive as media channels are disappearing. So if there's time in that timeline to have a second week of advertisement, does that still work?
We could certainly do a second week of advertising, plus even before the 14th, it's possible we could use our next door neighborhoods, our email distributions, what's new, and the prior parties that were involved in the housing element discussion in the last cycle, as well as Los Gatos leadership and our usual outreach. So we would activate all of those aggressively for all of the commission openings, not just the Housing Element Advisory Board.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, I'd like to invite those members of the public who wish to speak on this matter to fill out a card. Do we have any cards? No cards. Then that officially closes the public comment period. So I'd like to ask the council for further discussion or a motion on this. Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I'll go ahead and do a motion that we establish a Housing Element Advisory Board using alternative 1 of 13 members, and the timeline that was presented by staff with a modification of expanded outreach and advertisement.
Second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion. Vice Mayor.
I'll be supporting the motion, and I just wanted to say that I'm really pleased to see this proposal, given what happened with the affordable housing overlay zones and the enthusiastic response of the public to get involved in that process. I'm pleased to see that we're going to follow through on that, and I very much hope that some people I see in the audience will consider applying.
Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Passes unanimously. Moving on to other business. Thank you, Mr. Ordonez. The Albright Way Initiative.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Greg Larson, Town Manager. I'll be presenting the staff report that has been worked on collectively with others in the Manager's Office, Community Development, and the Town Attorney's Office. First, to orient you to the materials, you have the staff report that was distributed with the agenda packet on Thursday. You had an addendum which included additional public comment that was distributed last Friday. And then today there was a desk item that also included additional public comment that came in over the weekend and this morning. By way of background, petitions are established and protected by state constitution and state law, giving voters for every jurisdiction the same authority as their legislative body to basically enact any law, ordinance, or measure that the legislative body could act. And that dates back in the state constitution to the early 1900s. For this particular project, the council will recall that the Albright development was first approved in August 2011. There was then a successful legal challenge that resulted in an EIR being required, so the council rescinded the prior approval. Then in June 2013, a modified Albright proposal was brought forward and approved by council. There have been subsequent legal challenges and appeals are pending, and based on a legal ruling last Friday, the approved project is proceeding. The ballot title and summary were prepared for the petition at the request of the proponents of the initiative last fall by then Attorney Judith Propp. The circulators of the petition through door-to-door and store signature gathering, we understand, ended up collecting and submitting 4,113 signatures. The Registrar of Voters was directed to verify until roughly 3,000 signatures had been deemed sufficient, and indeed the Registrar of Voters did verify over 3,000 signatures, which exceeds the required 15% of registered voters to call a special election. As noted in the staff report, complaints have been made to the council as well as to the town directly regarding the circulation of the petition and the marketing and communications. Those complaints have been referred to the district attorney. The district attorney's prior response is provided in the staff report. And then since last Thursday, there have been additional complaints submitted, and those were referred to the district attorney as well, including the declarations that are part of the desk item, and the district attorney continues to view that there is no further action possible or necessary based on those complaints. The council action before you by state law is you must choose one of three actions tonight: either placing the initiative on the June 3rd ballot, adopting the initiative as it is written, or ordering a report before then coming back on March 3rd and choosing one of those two options above. And there'll be more discussion on the report shortly. There's other discretion before the council tonight as well. One is to order an impartial analysis by the town attorney. This is a fairly standard process in most jurisdictions, and it is included in the resolution that's presented as part of the packet. The council also has discretion to authorize a ballot argument for or against the ballot measure, and we'll discuss that shortly. There are two other actions that the council would have discretion on, and they're asterisked because they would require separate noticing at a future council meeting, and that would be for the council as a body to approve a ballot argument for or against a ballot measure rather than just authorizing a member to do that or to take a position on the ballot measure itself. The report, it's called the Elections Code Section 9212 report, may consider any or all of the following. The full list of allowable subject areas is provided in the staff report. This is a brief summary that highlights the major issues of fiscal analysis and costs, the land use elements, be it housing, employment, open space, impacts on traffic, schools, existing businesses, and any other subject is determined by council. If the council were to request this report, the council would be asked to establish the scope of what they would want studied, because it has to be brought back to your March 3rd council meeting by law, and staff would supplant other work and priorities to meet that commitment as directed by the council. Ballot arguments are provided, I should highlight that the impartial analysis by the town attorney is printed in the voters pamphlet. The study that I just referenced, the 9212 study, that is simply made available to the council and to the public for the later decision making. That is not reprinted in the voters pamphlet. Only the town attorney's impartial analysis is printed in the voters pamphlet. Ballot arguments are also printed in the voters pamphlet, and as most of the public and council is well aware, for ballot measures in California, there are typically statements for and against as well as rebuttals. The Registrar of Voters has established when those statements and rebuttals are due, and the order of selection for the authors of those is specified by state law. As mentioned earlier, the council may authorize an argument submission, and in fact this was done by the town council in 2007 when the skate park initiative was on the ballot. A council majority designated one member of the council to draft a ballot argument. Then once that argument was completed, other members of the council were able to review it and sign it if they so wish. However, I do want to highlight that only one or two council members may write such a delegated argument to avoid any Brown Act conflicts. Public notice, as mentioned before, would be required for full council public consideration and action on such a ballot argument, and then obviously council members could take individual action in support or opposition to a ballot measure as they so chose, but the attorney has recommended that occur following council consideration of the ballot measure to avoid any appearance of bias or conflict. Budget actions. This fiscal year, which runs through the end of June, was not previously deemed an election year for the town of Los Gatos, so no funds for elections were included in the budget that the council approved last May. However, we do have projected costs. There was $12,000 for the signature verification, a rough estimate of up to $20,000 for the 9212 report, $100,000 for the election itself if the 7-page initiative is included in the voters pamphlet. If the full initiative as well as all 295 pages of exhibits were included in the voters pamphlet, then according to the Registrar of Voters rates, that election cost would rise to $1.8 million. However, currently the exhibits are available on the town webpage as well as at the library and the clerk administrator's office. Based on the council's action or direction tonight, any required budget adjustments will be brought back at your mid-year budget review on February 18th. There has been a frequently asked questions document called a FAQ posted regarding the initiative process. Additional questions are being considered, such as those in the staff report or presented on the screen regarding current and proposed project differences, as well as current and proposed process differences. Those questions could just be answered and made part of the FAQ at council direction, or if the 9212 report is directed, they could be drawn from that report and added to the town website. I do want to highlight that all of the answers must be fact-based and not speculative. No town resources or staff time may be used for or against any ballot measure. That is a violation of the law to use public resources for political purposes, and that would drive staff to being as conservative as possible in making sure any answers provided to any questions are strictly fact-based, not advocacy, and not speculative. So the recommendations before you tonight would be by state law to approve the petition certification as specified by the elections official, which is the clerk administrator, as well as the registrar of voters. Then you have an option of either placing the initiative on the June ballot, and in so doing, you could order the impartial analysis by the town attorney and authorize ballot arguments to be drafted by one or two council members if you so desire. Or you could order the report, the 9212 report, that would come back at your March 3rd council meeting. Staff would ask that you specify the scope of that report to guide our work in a very short time frame. And then on March 3rd, when that report comes back, you would either need to adopt the measure entirely as it is, or then place the item on the ballot. And then last would be to refer budget action to the mid-year review. That concludes staff report. We're available for questions.
Thank you. Questions, Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple questions. Can I just go through them? First question is for Mr. Schultz. I'm curious about the timing of any election if we were to choose to put the matter on the ballot. I know that the elections code has limitations of not sooner than, not later than, and I'm wondering how those are all calculated and when this could appear if we chose to do that.
Sure. Good evening. With this petition that was filed, they specifically asked in the petition for a special election. So they've asked for a special election to occur. So that takes us to a certain code section in the election code section. And that code section says that once it's certified by you and the resolution is passed, the election must occur between 88 and 103 days. Now, there's two exceptions to that, and that's when there's going to be within a certain time frame also a statewide primary election. So regardless of whether you were to pass the resolution tonight or do a report and pass it in 30 days, either way, you're within that time frame to set this election at the June statewide primary. So under either code section, either exception, the way it's been presented and the way it's been presented to the city at that time, your really only choice is to set it at the June statewide primary. And you're within that 188, between that 88 days and 103.
Two follow-up questions. The first is, if the council were to order a report as suggested under 9212, does that affect when the election would be held if we put it on the ballot?
No, not at all. You'll still be within that time frame to hold it on the June 3rd date.
And in determining the dates for the election, if the council takes action on March 3rd rather than tonight to put it on the ballot, is there any method of or any possibility of putting the matter on the November election?
No, there would be none.
And that's because in the petition, the proponents
specifically asked for a special election. So
okay.
You could possibly postpone it. If you didn't want to hold it with the June, you possibly could postpone it an extra month or two and hold a special election, say in July or August, but you wouldn't be able to reach a date that would take you all the way to November.
Okay.
And if I might add, for a special election in July or August that is not consolidated with the regular county election on June 3rd, there would be an increased election cost to the town, totaling roughly $350,000.
I think I've got maybe a couple others. Again, for Mr. Schultz, the code section that allows the town council to request a report indicates that we need to refer it to a city agency or agencies. I'm using the language of the state law, so that's why I'm saying city. So does that mean we are restricted to refer it to a town agency versus, say, an independent consultant?
The interpretation of that city agency is actually within your own agency, which departments you would send it to. You don't send it to a different city or a different agency outside. It's just within your organization. But certainly the council has the ability, if it doesn't want staff to do that, a certain staff department to do that, it can request that an outside consultant prepare that on behalf of the city.
Then I think this is also for Mr. Schultz. With respect to the cost of the election, can the town either require or request the proponent of the initiative to contribute to the cost?
No.
And why not?
It's not in the election code.
Okay. Can the town or other interested parties engage in any kind of discussion that might result in either side either declining to write an argument for a particular ballot measure, or, as I've seen sometimes with the state legislature, with state initiatives, write an argument that says the question is moot, please don't vote a particular way on the initiative?
Certainly that's happened in other elections.
I think that's my questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember McNutt. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go back over a couple of the same points because based on the communication we received from the public and everyone's unfamiliarity with this process here, because we haven't had an initiative here for a while, and even just how it was presented tonight in your fourth slide, which talks about council action. When you say choose between, well, between is between two things, but then there are three bullets. And I feel that there's some misunderstanding that we do one of those three. And from my understanding and what you've just said and clarified with the vice mayor, we can order a report, that's fine, but we have to do one of the other two. We either have to put it on the ballot or we have to adopt it. And we have to do it by the certain dates that the town attorney has just laid out. Is that correct?
Correct, and we tried to be clear on the staff report and just summarized here. Either tonight or by March 3rd, the council would have to either place the initiative on the June 3rd ballot or adopt the initiative. If the council doesn't want to take one of those two actions tonight, you could order a report that would then have to come back to you by March 3rd, at which time you would have to take one of those first two options.
Okay. And then again, anticipating questions that may come up now or in following days. If someone doesn't like the title and the summary that was prepared initially for the petition, or doesn't like the impartial analysis prepared by the town attorney, who do they complain to, and what kind of process is there for those kinds of worries?
There's a legal challenge as to both of those. And the legal challenge for the ballot and summary that was prepared by the previous town attorney, that time frame has passed, I believe, because that ballot and summary won't show up anywhere now on the actual printed ballot material. When I do my impartial analysis, so if there was someone that felt that was not impartial, there is a challenge that you can do under the election code and can go to the court and go through the court system to have that challenged.
And does the court system give special preference to that so that it can get through the process and still appear on the June ballot, or could it throw us into that later time in summer where the price tag goes up to $350,000?
I'm not sure. I'd have to check the answer to that.
Okay. That's it for right now.
Further, Councilmember Brzezinski.
If I could direct the attention to this report. Our staff report indicates that it's an impact analysis report. Would you tell me exactly how that is going to be used in relationship to the first two bullets that are required that we choose one or the other? So how would the impact analysis relate to the final decision that we would make in March?
It is a tool to be used by the council to determine whether to adopt the initiative or to place it on the ballot. It is not specified in state law that that's its sole purpose, but that is how it's often used. I reviewed today about a dozen jurisdictions, most of which determined at this same meeting in their own schedule whether or not to do an impact analysis report, and then it's brought back 30 days later, and at that point the council decides whether to adopt the measure or to put it before the voters. And the report aids the council in that discussion.
All right, if I may. So my understanding, therefore, is that the council can ask that the report be generated out of your office.
Out of our office, specify any department. I think that will be determined by which issues the council sets for the scope of it. In my review of a dozen jurisdictions today, 2/3 of them did rely on some outside expertise, largely because of the timing factor of trying to get the report done in a short period of time in an independent, impartial fashion.
And so if the intent of the impact analysis report is to clarify the council's ability to determine whether this goes to the ballot or it is approved as written, that should be the direction of travel of those issues that we're asking the report to include. Is that not correct?
The council can determine how it would like to use the report. I would not purport to constrain the council's analysis and determination for when the issue comes back. I think the report becomes particularly important in jurisdictions when there has not been fully IR or studies done of a proposed project, and there are changes in everything that comes before the council, so the council could ask for that analysis if it so wished.
All right, I'll come back to this when we get further into the discussion. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Just a couple of other questions. Looking at the slide that's up now, do I understand correctly that the council could not determine this evening, depending upon what action it took? Let's imagine it decided to put the matter on the ballot, that the council could not make a motion and determine this evening what position it wanted to take on such a ballot measure. We could not do that absent another noticing. Is that correct?
Correct, but as the council did in 2007 at this same meeting, they did designate a member of the council to draft a ballot measure, in that case in opposition, a ballot argument, in opposition to the ballot measure, and then council members were able on their own to go review that and determine if they wanted to sign it or not.
Okay, then I'm confused. Because if the council were to make a motion to direct someone to write a ballot argument for or against, it's taking a position, correct?
And it's authorizing rather than directing. It's authorizing a person on the council to write a ballot argument for or against a measure. conceivably you could have authorized two members, one to write an argument for, one against. And what that really does is sets a higher precedence in terms of the state pecking order of whose ballot arguments get chosen and published.
Okay. So a follow-up sort of to that, which is, it's my understanding that the cost of election generally is going to be based upon essentially publishing costs of the county. So when you had those numbers up, they got much bigger as you had more paper. One of our items of discretion, and don't take this the wrong way, Mr. Schultz, was to have an independent analysis by the town attorney. We're not required to have that, and if we didn't have it, it would cost less, right? Theoretically, because it was less words. I'm not saying that I think it's a good idea, but I'm just saying that that's going to be what's going to determine the cost.
I'm not sure if we got that specific estimate, but based on what the Registrar of Voters has told the clerk administrator, that it's based on pages in the voters pamphlet. I think your assumption is correct. If there was not the impartial analysis page, there may be a reduced cost to the town.
And the impartial analysis is, I'm limited to only 500 words, so I don't get to be very lengthy.
Well, in that case, I'm not going to worry about cost savings in that regard. Let's see. I did have another question. With respect to Mr. Larson, you indicated that the report may, as you've seen in other jurisdictions, be tied to an EIR, which of course we had here. But in our staff report and in the election code, there are 8 different specific things that we can order a report on, correct? That's not tied to an EIR. Okay.
Further discussion. I have a question. Supposing that in the age of transparency, the council decides to have all 300 pages of this sent to every voter and then some, where would that $1.8 million come from in our budget or in our reserves?
That's a decision the council would make at the mid-year budget review. Based on what I know right now, we would likely recommend drawing that funding from reserves. I would also want to engage in a discussion with the Registrar of Voters of, are there cheaper ways for the town to achieve that same end? So instead of it being the Registrar of Voters publishing it in the countywide voters pamphlet, maybe there's a separate supplement that just goes to Los Gatos registered voters. But the $1.8 million estimate came from the Registrar of Voters using their per page cost for documents put in the voters pamphlet.
Follow up my own question. Essentially, it would be taxpayer funded dollars. Is that correct, to pay for that?
Correct.
Thank
and there's
you.
no legal requirement to have all the exhibits in the voters pamphlet.
But in the interest of full disclosure, say maybe not every voter has access to the internet or a computer or ability to get to the library to review the full text of the initiative, and they wanted to see it and they depended on their voter book. That's would be the fairest way to distribute it. Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor.
So one last thing on that, your bullet, if you will, 3 for the $100,000 for election with 7-page initiative. Is that the 7-page some document that's required, or it's a reduced summary?
The 7 pages is the actual initiative that they've proposed language. The 300 or the almost 300 pages is all the exhibits to that initiative. The law requires you not to even, you don't even have to put the 7-page initiative. You could do in your ballot just a summary of the initiative, but we thought it was best from a staff standpoint to put the full 7 pages, but not the exhibits, was at least a recommendation from staff.
Further discussion? Questions? Seeing none, I'd like to open the public comment period on this. And the first speaker is Jean Torrey? Okay.
Good evening. My name is Jean Torrey. I've lived in Los Gatos since 1972, and I'd like to urge you tonight to call for the report that you've been discussing before deciding what to do with this initiative. Last summer, when I encountered the signature gatherers for this petition, I was quite stunned by what I heard them saying, and more so by what I heard people who were deciding to sign it saying in terms of what they thought they heard. And that included that this would have no cost to the town because there was already an election. I was further stunned and appalled when I looked at the actual initiative and saw that rather than being sort of an affirmation of what the council had approved for the Albright project by the citizens of Los Gatos, it replaced large parts of the general plan. And in fact, excuse me, made changes to what was in the general plan. Several people I know who did sign the petition were quite surprised when they later found out what was actually in the initiative and now wish they could take back their signatures. None of them could be here tonight to say that themselves. So for those reasons, I would encourage calling for that report to make sure there is a complete understanding of what this initiative really calls for and perhaps allows for appropriate publicity about it, or publicity is the wrong word, education of the voters about it so they know what it is they're voting for, not what the petition supporter described as what they were voting for. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Barbara Dodson.
Good evening. My name is Barbara Dotson, and I've lived in Los Gatos for 30 years. And I also would encourage calling for the report to clarify what the initiative actually includes, and I'm particularly interested in seeing information on funding for education. This has been a big kind of unknown issue that really would be useful to get accurate information on that score. I am very troubled by the Albright ballot initiative, primarily because it takes the power to approve changes in the Albright project away from our elected officials and transfers it to a non-elected town official. The initiative process should not be the way changes in government functioning are made. I hope Council will support having an independent investigation and a report into the legality and consequences of the ballot measure. I am highly offended by the way this initiative has come about. A wealthy out-of-town conglomerate has taken it upon itself to change the way our government works. This huge developer has already spent large amounts of money to trick Los Gatos voters into thinking this initiative is good for them and good for the town. First, they hired signature collectors who misinformed the public as they collected signatures. Then they mailed misleading flyers to every address in town. I am concerned this developer with his very deep pockets will successfully buy approval of the initiative in June. I hope that the true purpose of this initiative will become clear to voters before it is too late. Too many people are blinded by the belief that the initiative will ensure a large amount of school funding. They can't see beyond the false claims of the initiative backers to recognize its true intent. I hope we can make voters recognize that the schools will receive a large amount of funding, whether or not this initiative passes. Money for schools will not change with this initiative. What will change will be the power of our elected officials to prevent unacceptable new components and even entire buildings from being added to the Albright project. With their money, the developers are trying to buy a reduction in oversight and public discussion of their plans. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Ann Robinson.
Ann Robinson, Charter Oaks. What I learned the following in 2013. I learned North Los Gatos is treated differently than South Los Gatos. The maximum height standards in the general plan doesn't apply to North Los Gatos. To allow a 65-foot building in an area with a 35-foot maximum height restriction is wrong. Would you have made a different decision if that was next to your home? The story pole policy was inadequate for Albright. There were no cherry pickers on the Charter Oak side. After my petition for more cherry pickers, I got zero help from the town council and the staff to get additional cherry pickers so that we could have a better understanding of the impact on Charter Oaks. In the end, I got one of the 4 requested additional cherry pickers, and that one helped me to get the 4th 4-story building lowered to 3 stories. There were inaccuracies in the EIR. There were pictures in the EIR that were not where the buildings were located. The traffic report for the intersection of Winchester and Lark Avenue was done the week before Memorial Day weekend. The traffic count of the cars turning right onto Winchester Boulevard from Lark Avenue between 7 and 9 a.m. was off by over 200 cars when counted by my daughter and I in April 2013. I learned Councilmember Przinski was chair of the VTA. I felt this was a conflict of interest. It seemed like he was going to want the highest density possible to make it more likely that the Vasona Light Rail would be funded. I experienced inappropriate behavior by the developer and other real estate brokers, starting with telling a commercial real estate broker he would lose his job if he continued to oppose the project. Hearing that the developer representative misled a resident by telling her the area between the parking structure and her home was going to be greenbelt instead of parking and vehicle circulation. I'm still really surprised that the town council allowed a 4-level parking garage to be within 30 yards of a residential community with a car exhaust and the noise from the vehicle circulation and parking bouncing off the 35-foot wall into the bedrooms and patios of the residents on Willow Hill Court. When it came to the June 3rd approval meeting, I watched the audience in favor of the development being people who never read the IR, didn't care about how it impacted Charter Oaks, and many didn't even live in Los Gatos. And recently, the Los Gatos residents were lied to by the Albright Initiative signature gatherers who said they were Netflix employees and Netflix would leave if they did not sign the petition. I learned that in the end, is it all about money? Which unfortunately is the main focus of many political decisions, and many people value money over what is right. What I'm thankful for, I'm thankful to Barbara Spector for lowering 2 of the 4-story buildings, to Lee Quintana for the first lawsuit which prevented an 85-foot building, and to the Oka Boys for their amazing efforts to prevent the over 600 affordable housing units to be located in North Los Gatos. In the future, I hope a report for the initiative, term limits for town council members, a rewritten PD so the developer can't use it to reduce setbacks, increase density, and increase their profits, and a rigidly held, upheld general plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Jack Veneta.
Good evening. My name is Jack Veneta, 42-year resident. This multi-billion-dollar developer has misled the public to think that they're giving the town a lot of money. I would like to spend the next couple of minutes presenting another view. In the initiative, if the initiative passes, it is not an initiative of the people nor by the people. It was formulated, written, publicized, and financed by a huge amalgamation of $185 billion developer plus 2 multi-million-dollar developers locally. Let's evaluate their claims by providing so much for the town of Los Gatos. First, they want to cap the construction activities mitigation fee at $485,000. What about the $125,000 or so that's due for the garage? What about any additional square footage they build? I don't see any mention of that, even though I brought it up at previous council meetings. Is that another giveaway of money that we could use for the Almond Grove roads? Secondly, they want to pay no more than $1 per square foot, but that number is at the very bottom of the Bay Area traffic mitigation fees. It is currently under discussion to be raised by the council. This $1 fee was set in 1994, and with inflation alone should be $1.81 today. In fact, 4 years ago, the council found that commercial businesses should be paying up to $209 per square foot, which would be $1,275,000, as opposed to their paltry $485,000. Third, they claim they're going to provide benefits to the town in terms of jobs. However, in a town with the second lowest unemployment rate in the Bay Area, 3.7%, just how many people will be qualified to work at this high-tech company? 4, if they're giving the town and schools all this money, where is the compensation for the nearly $7 million of road easements that the town is giving to them? 5, they brag about the money going to the schools, yet they don't tell you that this is only about 1/3 of what the schools will get from the North 40. There are still more than 14 other projects that will bring in more than $12 million in the first year of revenues and more than $6.5 million of recurring revenues thereafter. Council, you did your job, and they think that you can do it. They can do it better than you for the next 7 years. If this does not incense you enough to come out against the initiative, then don't expect the citizens to care either. Telling me that you're going to let the voters decide when this mega organization is pouring money into their self-serving development is telling me that you agree with them. This initiative is not for the public, nor by the public. If you'll stand against this initiative, we'll stand with you and fight it. We don't have their money and we can't buy influence, but we have a lot of people that don't want to see you nor the Planning Commission lose your power to keep this town a great place to live. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Jennifer Grewal.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Graywall. I have lived in Charter Oaks for the last 14 years. There is a fourth option, I believe. And the fourth option is, can't you, as the town council, put your own initiative on the ballot at the same time as this one and request that the voters of this town vote for that and against the other option? This initiative has removed the public review from any changes or requests that this project wants to make once the initiative passes. They will put the community development director, which is a staff position, in charge of making any changes on this project. They're asking to completely bypass any public review in the town's processes. This is a huge amount of power being given to one staff person. At the same time, they specifically ask that any changes that the town wants or that the town council requests go through the public review process. How can you let that happen? Please, if there is a way to put another initiative on this that backs what you had originally approved and keeps the process in place, I ask you to do it. Separately, listening to the arguments tonight, having made all of the arguments, and my neighbors and I made all of the arguments that I heard tonight about the second story going onto the house, this was a PD that completely bypassed the original zoning of this land. It was not within the guidelines that had been set for this. We would not be here had this been approved for what the land use had been intended. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Philip Albanese.
Good evening. Good evening, Council. My name is Philip Albanese. I'm a Los Gatos resident, and I'm standing here today in support of the Albright campus development. As I did before, I want to begin by saying the fact that I'm 28 years old. I highlight my age because I think it is important to recognize that my age group, the particular demographic that may very well have the most at stake, has been underrepresented throughout this process. My personal interest in this development stems directly from that point. Being that my wife and I want to live and raise our family here in Los Gatos, I feel with strong conviction that the development is right for our community now and for years to come. It represents progress that is necessary for the town of Los Gatos to stay the community that it is. The basis for my conviction stems from the fact that it is ultimately the people who make up the community. The Albright development will attract some of the most talented people in the world to Los Gatos, and this simply cannot be passed up. Of course, the added tax money and jobs that this campus will bring to the town cannot be overlooked either. It's reassuring to see that the majority of the town is thinking along the same lines. The recent initiative petition and signature drive was met with strong enthusiasm and support. It's not then surprising to see recent polls indicating that more than 75% of the community is inclined to support the initiative. The people of Los Gatos are overwhelmingly in favor for this progress. I'm excited for the formal qualification of the initiative and look forward to bringing this issue to finality at the June election. Thank you.
Mr. Albanese, I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Since you mentioned you're 28 years old, do you currently reside in Los Gatos?
I do.
And how long have you lived in Los Gatos?
A year and a half to 2 years.
Okay. And another question about the initiative.
Yes, sir.
Before you circulated it, were you aware that it could cost up to $1.8 million to put that in the voter book?
1.8. I wasn't aware of 1.8 million. I believe that the cost of the 100,000 for the 7-page, or as the town attorney was saying, for him to provide a summary, make that cost less, was more in line. The initiative was put together because I think that my personal belief is that the development is too good to pass up.
Were you at all part author of this initiative?
I overlooked it and I believed in what it said. I was behind it. Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Further questions? Seeing none, thank you. Next speaker, Leslie Logan.
Hello again. Good evening. As you all know by now, my name is Leslie Logan and I live at 136 Loma Alta Avenue. I'm 46. I chose to join Philip Albanese to sign the letter of intent to circulate a petition to propose this initiative that supports the development at Albright Way because I believe it is time for the lawsuits and delays to end and for this project to move forward. We have heard from the community and they have told us very clearly that they support this project and this petition. We were able to collect more than the required signatures in record time because people in Los Gatos want this project to move forward. In fact, I've heard from many people who live in Monte Sereno or unincorporated parts of Los Gatos that they were disappointed that they could not participate and sign. The initiative is a way to allow the people of Los Gatos to have a voice, to say once and for all that they support Netflix and its growth here in town. The lawsuits and the antics that have delayed this project for Netflix have only served to delay the jobs and revenue this development means for our town, our area, and our schools. The way to move forward now is to place this initiative on the ballot so the community can have its say and not be held hostage by a few individuals who appear to be using our judicial system to try and kill it. And those individuals will have their opportunity to vote as well. I am not a patsy for the developer. I have a mind of my own, and I stand up for what I believe, especially when I think it is in the best interest of the youth in my community. I always have. I respect others' rights to disagree, but harsh words, inaccurate accusations, and personal attacks on my character are inappropriate and in the end are more a statement about the character of the person who makes such comments than me. For the record, I have not received any payment or compensation from the developer or their consultants. I am doing this because I am a resident and I am a parent who strongly believes in the appropriate economic development for Los Gatos. I am proud to stand with the other members of We Support Los Gatos. Thank you.
Questions for the speaker? Seeing none, I have one real quick. Being that you are also one of the circulators of the initiative, are you aware that the council had already approved the project largely as written in your initiative?
Yes, I was aware of that.
So the tax revenues and the jobs in the Netflix campus had already been approved by council, yet this initiative appears to want to reverse that council decision. Are you aware
Actually,
of that?
what it wants to do is reverse the council decision so that the initiative can be placed on the ballot and the people can have their say, and we can move forward and get rid of the lawsuits.
So the objective is to eliminate the lawsuits?
And move forward with the project,
And move
because
forward.
that's what the people of Los Gatos want.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker, John Shepherdson.
I resident of Los Gatos since I was 4, so that makes it 49 years. I suggest we, to the council, that we do have a report. It's not going to prejudice an election in June. As I understand it, the town council approval maintains oversight of the development. The town council has approved project. The planning commission has oversight. The community development director remains under control of the town council. We have the normal A&S review, and it's at 485,000 square feet. So we can't see this very well, but the developer's ballot proposal strips oversight from the town council. It strips planning commission oversight. Oversight goes from the town council and the planning commission to a non-elected community development director, which I believe is Ms. Bailey presently. So all of this authority is going to go to Ms. Bailey or someone else in the future. And it also caps fees on the project at $485,000. So normally it's $1 a square foot, but they've capped it. So the bridges, they're not going to pay for. The square footage, I don't know how it works out in a garage. So it's very different. And the next. So why do I suggest that we call for a report? Because clearly it's changing the town's sovereignty. Decisions are by a non-elected person. Is it consistent with the general plan? I don't know. Is it legal to change the government decision-making? Is there a conflict of interest? Because if the report is generated by staff and the power is going to go to Ms. Bailey, which enhances the power of staff, then is there a conflict there? Is the ballot summary flawed? There was no mention in anywhere. Well, this is out of the ballot. The primary administrator of the specific plan is the town's community development director. It's nowhere in the town's ballot summary. I suggest that it was flawed. There's no mention about capping of fees. So when the public read these petitions, they didn't have the most critical information before them. Also, these flyers that were getting out, these mass mailers by the Carlisle Group, there's no mention about the control going to Ms. Bailey. There's no mention about capping of fees. So I suggest that a report is necessary to address these issues. Thank you.
Next speaker, Cecil Annison.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Leonardis, Ms. Jensen, other council members. We're not here tonight to debate whether or not the project is good for the town or not. That's already a done deal. It's already been approved by the town council. The group that is calling for a report is in favor of Netflix staying in the town. We want it to stay as long as it's a viable business and wants to stay here. The group that's opposing the initiative wants money for the schools. Personally, I have 2 children that are a product of our wonderful schools, and I want all the money that we can get for the schools. But my question is, why would the developer want to put an initiative on the ballot if it were just the same as the town council's approval? That doesn't make any sense to me. So I encourage you to look closely into the town council's approved project versus the proposed ballot project. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Suzanne Noble.
Is this the flu? Is this the flu passer arounder? Mr. Mayor, Ms. Vice Mayor, council members. My name is Suzanne Noble. I moved to Los Gatos in 1960. And I've seen a lot of changes, but this one, I've been out of town for the last 2 months. When I got home and started catching up on what had been going on, I was surprised to see that the initiative, first of all, had been qualified. So I'm here to request that you do the report and bring some transparency to this whole project. The developer has repeatedly indicated in public and with mass mailers and et cetera that the proposed ballot project is essentially the same as what you approved last summer. I submit that this is false. There's a fundamental difference, and that's the fact that the ballot project strips the oversight and the decision-making from the town council and the other departments of the town. It places those duties in the hands of a non-elected staff person, the community development director, direct attack on how our town makes land use decisions, and I believe it sets a dangerous precedent. You all know what the change, how these are different. So I will just go to my final point, which is I have been so impressed with the way you've handled the North 40, with the transparency there and the way that the public has been invited to review and watch the review of every single word. It's really been good for the town. This ballot goes in the other direction. It makes government less transparent, and it consolidates power in one non-elected person. It creates a risk for abuse. I'd like to see the report done, taken care of, ordered. In fact, I implore you to do that and provide those findings to the public so that we can have a well-informed vote in June instead of being forced to deal with unintended consequences in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Jeff Lockridge.
Hi, my name is Jeff Lockridge, 109 Paseo Laura, a 34-year resident in Los Gatos. Our town attorney prepared and provided an official ballot title and summary for the proposed initiative for use by the proponents for publication and circulation of the petition. This official document makes it clear that the initiative version of the Albright Way project and the June 2013 Town Council approved version are the same. No differences were pointed out or mentioned at all. Anyone reading this would be misled into believing that voting yes on the ballot in June would result in exactly the same plan that was approved by our town council. Not true. In fact, this is a totally useless document and needs to be revised. Apparently we're past the time, though. By utilizing this and other equally misleading information, the petition signature gatherers were able to generate more than the required number of signatures for the initiative. I wonder why. Had the original initiative summary been accurate and complete, this report might not have been necessary. But since no accurate information has yet been shared with the town residents regarding the differences between the two plans, then a report is indeed warranted. We desperately need an official, accurate document explaining the differences between the two plans. Our town staff should have provided this in a more proactive way. Let's be clear that this is for the sharing of transparent information for the town residents. According to my read of the initiative, there are so many fundamental differences that will affect our town in many different ways. Los Gatos voters have a right to this information now and not in 5 months with the ballot in June. Please use your authority under Election Code Section 9212 to order a report. The town residents deserve to know the truth. And there's another option for the town council. The public should be aware that the council has the authority to place an alternative measure on the ballot, if they choose. Council could place the previously approved June 2013 version of the Albright Way project on the ballot. This information is stated in Section 9222 of the Election Code. This would ensure that our town government remains intact and is allowed to go forward unencumbered by the initiative from the developers. By my calculation, this June ballot decision would need to be made by March 3rd to ensure that the election be held no less than 88 days after the date of the order of election. Please consider an alternative initiative to enable voters to have a clear choice, one that was the one that was not bought by the developer. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Janet Prinzavali.
Good evening, Council and fellow Los Gatos residents. My name's Jan Prinzavali. I've only lived here 3 years, and I've been thrust into this whole thing, and I'm just shocked that this town that I esteem so well and wanted to move here for years and finally did get here in my retirement has approved or thrown out the general plan and gone forward in the situation where now we're going to be having these gigantic buildings in our little town. My biggest thing is, how much power does Los Gatos want to put in the hands of developers who hired paid practitioners, gave misinformation in gathering signatures, used the names of town council members without permission, and distributed several propaganda flyers to promote their cause? Can our town be bought by deep-pocket developers? I urge the town council to thoroughly investigate and educate the public on all the ramifications of this 300-page initiative before the June ballot. We do not have the luxury of the 6-month education that was allocated for leaf blower restrictions. This initiative will change Los Gatos forever. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Sean Welch.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the Town Council. My name is Sean Welch. I'm legal counsel for We Support Los Gatos and proponents of this measure. I wanted to just briefly address a couple of questions that the council members had and also some comments that have been made this evening. I'll start with the public first. I think ultimately what these comments reflect is, or at least boil down to, is a distrust of the town's voters. The initiative process is about voters taking control of an important issue. It's really that simple. This project was approved by the town council, and this project is now being presented to the voters for an up or down vote one way or another. I think as everyone is well aware, this project is being contested pending litigation, has been favorable to the town and to the project applicants, but it remains, it lingers. And this initiative is simply a way for the project as approved by the town council to go before the voters for an up or down vote. And one comment we've also heard this evening several times is this concept that the initiative strips the council of power or strips some other body of power. That's simply not true. Again, these are the people acting as the legislative body making a determination about the project for themselves and resolving this litigation once and for all. It is no different than the current project. The town council acts as the legislative body, it approves a project, and then it goes to staff. That's what's happening here. It is really quite that simple. It's not a trick. There's no deception. The initiative was intended simply to allow the town of Los Gatos to vote on the measure, up or down, weigh in, have ballot arguments, have a good debate, and then end it and move on. Up or down, one way or the other, people can approve the project or they can decide not to. Folks can make arguments they're making tonight, sure, certainly. But also, we welcome a 9212 report. Absolutely. An opportunity for the town to say one way or another, an impartial way, what this initiative does, I think would be helpful and it would clear up a lot of misinformation. A couple things quickly. Elections Code 9280, this comment about, whoa, this outrageous cost of $1.8 million to print it in the ballot guide. The Elections Code expressly provides for the measure to be provided to voters either separately or via web link or some other way. It's common. Measures are long all the time. And anybody that actually reads those ballot guides will have seen it before, which says this measure is available, full text of it, at your town clerk's office or at the library, or on the web, just as it is now. So I just don't want to get thrown off by that large number. The other thing about the legal challenge is a question: would that delay a June ballot? Absolutely not. Under the Elections Code, you are permitted, or voters permitted, to challenge a ballot argument or an impartial analysis for lack of impartiality. The burden to win is quite high, but one thing is for sure, and that is you cannot challenge and interrupt the timeline of the election. If you go in late, you're denied, judge kicks you out, election goes forward.
Thank you, Mr. Welch. Questions? Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you, and thank you for saying his name, because I blanked out there for a minute and didn't hear you when you were introducing yourself. I'm concerned about one thing that you said, because I think it's misleading, at least is how I understand the situation. When you're talking about an up and down vote, that implies that if the initiative were to fail, the project goes away. And that is not the case. The developer has an entitled project that would continue.
That's correct.
Is that not correct?
That's correct.
So it's not it's here or it's gone. It's here or it's here. It's just which kind of here it's going to be.
That's correct.
Okay.
And the litigation is pending, and there is uncertainty around the project,
Yeah,
although it is
understand all
proceeding.
Yeah. Just wanted to make sure we clarified that, so that
It was a
there
good clarification.
Not even more confusion out there. Thank you.
That's fair.
Mr. Welch, I have a question for you. Your initiative apparently calls for future changes to be done by further initiative process by will of the voters. And I thought about this for a bit, and I thought this kind of leaves you in a vulnerable position, because what we have now is an approval by council, and if your initiative passes, it will rescind the council's approval and put in place your own specific plan and your own set of rules for changes. But one of those sets of rules is further changes by initiative process. And if the voters were to come forward and say, hey, we want 350,000 square feet, we're going to circulate an initiative. We want our buildings to be 35 feet high, we're going to circulate an initiative. Did you consider that prospect of being a side effect of issuing this initiative?
Of course. There's another consideration as well, Mr. Mayor, which is this really puts the developer into a box. They have to build what they're saying they're going to build, and they can't deviate from it, right? If any sort of change in that, if they want to change the project up, they can't. They have to go back to the voters. But however, once a project is actually constructed and built, it's not like someone's house is going to get taken down because someone challenges it later with an initiative, right? There's the law of vested rights. It applies to initiatives as well as to in any development context. But the point I'm making is simply that this really puts the developer, it puts the Albright White project into a box. The voters can assess it, and they can decide whether or not to approve it.
Thank you. Further questions? None. All right, next up is Patrick Tillman.
Good evening. My name is Pat Tillman. I live at 150 Maggie Court. As part of the report process, I assume that's where it's going, would you mind addressing the law of contract formation? Because there's some part in here I just do not understand. It seems that there is a group of people that I don't believe it's going to take much discovery to determine they are basically an arm of the developer. They are the same thing, but regardless, the real party in interest here is the developer. The developer was given a 485,000 square foot PD. I looked at that more like an offer. If you want to go that way, go that way. If not, then you stay at light industrial. Okay, there's the option there. They took the 485,000 square foot PD. Okay, is that or is that not a deal? And that has some terms to it. One of the terms has to do with, for example, amendments and whatever's changes are to return to the town council. There are a lot of terms and conditions of that 485,000 square foot PD. And are they or are they not binding? Now, with that deal, can you, through a proxy, an agent, somebody, something that's basically an alter ego, go through and try to take what you got by virtue of a settlement, go around that process and get more? but get no less than the settlement. In litigation context, you settle your dispute, and still, you file your lawsuit, and you insist on your trial because you want to put forth your best case scenario. And if you get your best case scenario, you want to take that. But if you lose, you get your settlement amount. This doesn't seem to be much different. I can couch it differently, but I'm only given 3 minutes, and I only have one left. Next, the summary statement. I have 7 different points to that. I don't have time. It looks to me like it was written by the developer. It didn't cover much of anything. It does not help this town protect itself. That's not an impartial statement. That's a statement by a developer. Somebody else made a comment about the reports. This is a plus 200-page report, maybe 300-page report. This was written by the developer, financed by the developer, it was pushed by the developer, and these folks are very eloquent. They make a very good presentation. Even at 28, I am impressed. That's good public speaking. It's my understanding that the town council can be proactive. You're not precluded, and I encourage you to do so. The information that's been presented to you should get out to the voters, to the residents. We deserve it. This has not gone as I think it should have, and it just seems a little inappropriate, and I'm out of time, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tillman. Next speaker, Greg Snow.
Charter Oaks resident, Mayor Leonardis, council members, and my wish for a speedy recovery to former Mayor Spector. Thank you for your past and present efforts to allow Los Gatos to grow without most of the growing pains endured by other fast-growing communities. I believe that all 5 members of the town council have the town and their citizens' best interest at heart. I also understand that sometimes there is disagreement on what those best interests are. My concerns over the proposed initiative concerning the Albright Way project that seems to be headed for the June ballot are multifold, but I'd like to boil it down to the most egregious. I'm opposed to a shift away from the planning department and elected town council the authority and duty to interpret, determine, and render land use and planning decisions for this project. They're being delegated to a single individual who will not be required to seek advice from your council, from legal counsel, or from public input. Town planning seems to be at risk, and the town can ill afford to take that risk. Without recourse by the courts, it's setting a dangerous, the courts or the council or other legal opinion is setting a dangerous precedence. I don't believe that the average voter understands the implications and the abdication of authority embedded in the initiative. Very few, if any, will read the 300-plus page document and be able to interpret its true effect. That in itself seems misleading. On the subject of misleading, most of the petition signers were only told that this measure was intended to keep Netflix in town and that without it they would leave and that the school would lose large sums of funds that they already have in the current funding plan. Those were lies. I came out of Walgreens drugstore during the petition process. A woman grabbed my arm and she said, "Here, come over, you got to sign this." And she had just talked to the collection agent, and what she got out of it was, if you don't sign this, Netflix will leave town. I tried to explain to her that that was not the case, but she couldn't. She believed the pollster because of their organization and flyers. I hope that the town council has some trepidation about this ballot measure and what it means for the future of our town and the planning process, and feels a little hijacked or threatened by what big money is capable of doing that has unintended consequences for our citizens. I hope that at the very least they will call for a report on the measure that will identify the prime points and differences between what was approved by town council and what will be approved if this ballot measure passes. That report could be a helpful tool for voters to decide from an informed position how they wish to vote on this measure. It may also give the town council a clear mandate to support or oppose this measure. In my opinion, it would be irresponsible to do neither. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Andy Wu.
Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the council. Oh, I'm sorry, I should put that closer. I'm going to go off script, which is always a dangerous thing, but I'd like to start off by thanking young Mr. Albanese. His family has been great patrons to my alma mater. I think they poured just about all the concrete that went to every single building since the 50s. And I'd like to thank Ms. Logan. She used a word that started off this evening, I think, very well. She used the word compromise. I'd like nothing more to see a compromise, and I think that her counsel, her organization's counsel, mentioned that litigation is pending. Well, as one of the named plaintiffs to that litigation, I can tell you I'd like to see nothing more than the election be rendered moot, but I don't think that's going to happen. Originally, I planned to speak on calling for a report, a 9212 report. Then I saw Mr. Larson's numbers there, and I said, $20,000 for a report, do we really need that? And of course, the able town attorney, Robert Schultz, has mentioned that there are other options that this council can consider. And I was thinking, perhaps it would be best if this council decided to write a ballot statement, even if there are two opposing ballot statements, and let the residents of Los Gatos know what its position is. I mean, after all, this initiative is coming after the council's power. It doesn't really matter to me which way the initiative goes, so long as there's an informed public who is able to reasonably assess the consequences of this initiative and vote in a educated manner. And I don't think that the citizenry of Los Gatos can do that without somebody stepping forward to educate them. Certainly as private citizens, I'm not in a position to do that. I don't have the resources that the developer has. I can't put a mass mailer out. I can't run commercials on TV unless I mortgage my house and liquidate my retirement fund. And I'm not going to do that for this ballot initiative. But you, the town council, can do that. You can put the word out as to what your position is and what you believe this initiative means. And I think that would be the rational way to go. And I think you can also defer that decision until March. I don't think you need to necessarily make that choice, and Mr. Schultz can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think you necessarily need to make that choice this evening. You can defer that decision and think about what you're going to write and who is going to write a ballot initiative. And I think that would be at least my recommendation. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. That's the last card. If anybody else wishes to speak on this item, please bring your cards forward.
Hi, Jeff Black, live at 362 Bachman Avenue. I'd like to encourage the approval, of the initiative for the June 3rd election. Our community has shown time and again that we want the project. It's been approved twice here in the council. The IR has been approved, and I think it's been shown throughout the community that there's strong support for the project. I mean, it's unfortunate that there's been numerous lawsuits that have delayed the project when a majority of residents really do support this project. The initiative that's been written has been designed to mirror the council's approved plans of the project, and we've heard numerous comments here recently that the decision-making process will be usurped from the council. I just don't think that's the case. I think the decision-making process is exactly the same in the initiative as was in the council's motion, which directed the community development director and the town's consulting architect to approve modifications. Finally, I think the entire citizenship should make a call on this. I mean, there's nothing more democratic than an initiative process. I respect everyone's opinions here. It's been fully debated. We've talked about it for two and a half years, and I guess I like what someone else said earlier. It's time for an up or down vote, but it's time to move on the project. So I support it, and I encourage you to process it quickly.
Thank you. Next speaker is Richard Herbst.
Thank you, members. Excuse me. My name is Richard Herbst. I reside at 143 Newell Avenue, Los Gatos. One of the things that I keep hearing is that the people of Los Gatos want this project. And I need to make something clear here. There's nobody that's on my side of the fence here that is against Netflix. Nobody. And the petitioners said that the people of Los Gatos want to keep Netflix here, and that's agreeable. Nobody wants to let Netflix leave. And so it was inappropriate for that statement to be made. Holy guacamole, that is a lot of money for this ballot initiative. John, do you really want the the city to spend all that
Mr.
money on
Erbs.
that initiative? I mean, you're
Mr.
a
Erbs,
reasonable
could you
guy.
please
I just
address-
can't believe you would do, well, excuse me, okay.
You have to address the council. I'm sorry.
John. John and I are personal friends now. We've been here so many times together. John, do you really want the city to spend that kind of money on this initiative, which, in my opinion, the way I read it, is really strips the council of any authority? And I can't believe that you would want to do that. I certainly wouldn't. If I was sitting in your chairs, I wouldn't want to do that. I don't know if Mr. Albanese or Mrs. Logan really anticipated that it was going to cost the city that kind of money. And I hope it's not lost on the fact that Ms. Logan, when she was here, was petitioning because of a height on the property that's adjacent to hers, and said it sets a precedent. What kind of precedent's being set by us doing this kind of stuff? I would suggest that you honestly consider the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Larry Arzi.
Good evening. I'd also like to support the request for the report to be made, along with the analysis. I don't think that money's the issue right now. We need the public to understand what's happened, and they need to get it in front of them. So spending money, I don't think, is that big a concern, even if it's 1.8 million. To quote Mr. Brzezinski, sometimes it's not the money. He used that on a similar ballot initiative. I think all the points have been covered about the depth of deception that the developer has gone through to falsify information to the public. The biggest one he managed to put in writing, and you've all seen the paraphernalia that he sent out, he tells the truth when he says that there is a current compromised project, and then he goes on to say that the compromised project should be voted for and moved forward. They're making up stories on it. He goes on to talk about the necessity for the Vasona Light Rail, and that's why you should vote for this initiative. Vasona Light Rail is not part of a reality. Again, to quote Mr. Brzezinski, when asked about when we're going to get Vasona Light Rail, his response was, when pigs can fly. So please, do a good job on this.
Thank you, Mr. Arzi. Last call. Are there any other speakers on this? Seeing none coming forward, I'm going to close the public comment period and look to council for discussion.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. I turned in a card 2.5 hours ago.
Would you please come forward? I don't remember you speaking, and I don't have your card in front of me, sir.
Thank you. We have a nice microphone system here, but hardly anybody uses it. At least I'm the only one, I guess, that are sensitive about it. I'm Robert Schwimmer. I live in the Charter Oaks community, and I'm mad as hell. I'm in my 96th year, and I have better things to do now for my remaining time. What got my cork out after town council approved the development was the initiative intending to avoid due process of law and providing outsized and increased activities. Their hired signature gatherers were provided with talking points peppered with outright lies, misleading statements, and actually performing as if, mostly as if everything that they said really doesn't matter as long as people would sign. The new idea presented in the initiative, which was not publicized at all to my knowledge, is to have an appointed executive to make decisions in lieu of the town council. I don't understand what the so-called report could do, supposedly unbiased. I don't think one person can create an unbiased report, and there's no indication of how that would be done. I believe council should have, and probably does have, the authority to take actions within the law to question the validity of the initiative. The initiative has been promoted in a fraudulent manner with lies and subterfuge and publications that are inaccurate and are intended to simply convince the public to sign things that they don't know they're signing, like Congress did with the law that we all know about. I don't know how such a law can be allowed to be come to fruition with a vote when it's inherently fraudulent. Council must have enough authority, and I think there's an indication for it in the bottom line of that display that was shown on the screen, to take an action that is not necessarily dictated by previously by state law. The law should not be allowed to come to a vote because it's full of fraud.
Mr. Schwimmer, your time is up. Thank you. Are there any other cards out there? Or anyone else wishing to speak? Seeing none, now we will close the public comment period and look to council for discussion. Vice Mayor?
Actually, I have a question of staff.
Go ahead.
Or maybe a couple. The first one, Mr. Schultz, a couple of speakers said that there was an option for the council to present its own initiative under section 9222, and I'm curious what that provides for and what your advice is on that.
Council at any time has the ability on its own to place an initiative on a ballot. So that's capable of doing that at any time.
So that doesn't qualify as using town resources or money to support or oppose an initiative?
No, totally different section.
Okay. Gosh, I just lost my train of thought. I'll remember it.
Councilmember McNutt?
Thank you. Just a follow-up question on that. Council cannot put a measure on the ballot that says we changed our minds. Can we? On a project that we've already improved, it's been entitled?
I think you're correct there. I was just talking in general terms that council has the ability to put initiative on or not on, depending on what your initiative language entailed. Would then my analysis would begin on whether that's legal.
I just wanted to clarify that. So,
and clarifying also, you have the ability to put an initiative on, but then you can't use public resources to promote it during the time once it's on the ballot.
Okay. So what I want to do tonight is, as little as possible is what it's going to sound like, for a couple of reasons. I do think that we all lack a lot of information that we need to have to better understand the differences between what was approved and what is in the initiative language. I'm prepared to go ahead and certify the collection of the signatures for the Register of Voters, and to call for this report. I do not want to talk tonight we're less than full strength up here. I don't want to talk tonight about ballot arguments or competing measures or whether or not we want to adopt it or put it on the ballot at this time. So I'm actually ready to go ahead and make a motion, if it's all right with the mayor, to just get the conversation started on that. So I'll go ahead and make a motion to accept the election officials' certification of the sufficiency of the Albright Way petition and to request that appropriate staff and whatever other resources they need prepare a report that tells us three primary things. And I know in the staff report, well, let me finish that and then I'll go back and tell you give you my other annotated notes. So the three areas that I am interested in is a very clear delineation of what is different or the same between what was approved by council and what is outlined in the initiative, and that includes size, dollars, just any of the factual points that have been talked about tonight or that seem appropriate to cover. Secondly, a very clear understanding and description of what the initiative authorizes town staff to be able to do and what it can't do. And then third, what the impact of the initiative, if it's approved, has on the general plan, if any. So that's the motion. I'll pause for a second to see if there's a second.
I'll second it for purposes of discussion.
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to say that I know that in the staff report, there was a long list of possible things that could be included in the report. The reason I don't think that we need all of that is because this is an odd duck kind of initiative. Most initiatives are proposing something new that hasn't been through the process, or it's proposing something that went through the process unsuccessfully. And so therefore it needs all of that groundwork to really lay out in a very clear way what is being talked about. We've had 2.5 years of public discussion, environmental impact reports. I think we all remember coming in for that last meeting on Albright, and the pile of papers was this high because Joel had to carry mine in for me out of the car because it was just, so overwhelming. So I don't think that we need a lot of the basic information that's outlined in these 8 points here in the staff report. So I would focus just on those three. Keep it clean, clear, crisp, and factual.
Vice Mayor.
First, a point of process. I wonder if we can separate the motion to just certify the signatures from the motion with respect to the report. Would the maker of the motion and the seconder consider that? If not, I'll go on to my comments about the other part.
That's fine. So I will withdraw that motion and
Let's bifurcate.
yeah, and just bifurcate it. So let's do the housekeeping one. I consider housekeeping first, which is the certification of the whatever it is, of the petition.
Accept the election official's certification
you.
of the sufficiency of the Albright Way petition, and there's a...
Exactly.
And that's agreeable to the seconder of the
Okay.
motion.
So we'll do that one, get that one out of the way.
So all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Passes unanimously.
And then I'll resurrect the second part of my original motion for conversation purposes.
Vice Mayor.
I was wondering if Councilperson Przinski was going to maintain his second.
I was intending to maintain the second on that.
Okay, go ahead.
While I definitely support the notion that there should be a 9212 report, what I would not like to see is a general report as indicated by Councilwoman McNutt. 9212 gives us 8 specific items which we can look at for a report to determine the impact of the initiative. The town staff has suggested, and many people have indicated, that what you'd like to see is a delineation of the differences between the council-approved action and the proposed initiative. I think that might be able to be done by an FAQ, which is suggested in the staff report, but then answers specific questions in 9212. I'm not going to quibble with that specifically, but so in just going through 9212, the first thing that we can consider is fiscal impact. So in looking at a particularly specific question, my question would be, what is the cost of holding an election to the town? I think we might have answered that. So another one is, how does the proposed initiative impact the dollar amount required to be paid to the town as a community benefit under the council-approved action, as opposed to the proposed initiative action? And in particular, how does exclusion of any potential square footage in the sky bridges that are proposed in the initiative affect the amount paid to the town as a community benefit? Does it result in less payment? With respect to, I think, Commissioner, sorry, I'm used to that, Councilwoman McNutt's proposal regarding general plan, I think we could be more specific with respect to when, that one of the sections of 9212 specifically addresses internal consistency with the town's general plan and other zoning and specific plans. So what I would want to have answered is internal consistency with general plan, specific plan, not the one proposed by the initiative, existing specific plans, zoning ordinances, and other policies that are in effect by the with the town, and in particular, how does the proposed initiative exempt the specific plan from the application of other policies that may not be included in the zoning ordinance? So, for example, tree ordinance or some such. And it's been discussed a lot tonight, under what circumstances would any change to the project return to the Planning Commission or Town Council? I think that goes with internal consistency and with the zoning. And in particular, the initiative limits review to 7 years, otherwise by initiative. And it also makes a change between I think what it calls a material alteration to the plan, may trigger a Planning Commission or Town Council review, but a minor change and doesn't. So how is that characterized, and when would a project actually come back for review? How does the proposed initiative affect, if it does, the town's ability to make changes to the general plan? Because as I understand it, the town can only make 4 changes per year. So if the initiative is adopted, does the town lose one of those changes by way of the initiative? Let's see, Section 4 of 9212 allows the report to address funding for infrastructure, which includes schools and transportation. So this was actually mentioned in our public testimony as well. What's the difference, if any, between the property tax revenue received by the town under the council-approved project versus the initiative proposed project, if any? What is the contribution to our schools under SB 50 in the council-approved action versus the initiative proposed, if any? How will the initiative affect the amount of traffic impact fees required to be paid to the town? Again, a distinction between the council-approved project and the proposed project. And in particular, to the extent that the initiative limits traffic impact fees to those in effect at the time that the building applications were applied for, if the town council decided to alter its traffic impact fees, what effect would the initiative have? Would the town be prevented from applying any applicable traffic impact fees back to the project? We also get to ask about impact on open space and traffic congestion under Section 7. So my question would be, if there is any change to the fees or a change from the council-approved project to the initiative proposed project, in traffic fees or open space? What's the impact of that? And finally, it was brought up, and we can ask for it in 9212.5, is a question about the impact on the community's ability to attract and retain businesses and employment. So my question would be, with respect to that, is there actual factual data that would indicate it would be increased or decreased employment in the council-approved action versus the initiative proposed action? And is there what amount of taxes, fees, et cetera, is the town now currently collecting from Netflix? Would that change under the initiative proposal versus the council approved? And what is the status of Netflix's lease at the proposed project and council approved project? And how long is Netflix's commitment to the town, and when was that lease signed? And I know that's a lot for you to write down, Mr. Larson, and a lot for you to remember, council members and mayor, but I think all of those questions fall within Commissioner McNutt's motion, especially since number 8 is any other matter the legislative body requests to be in the report. So I would ask for very specific things, which I think might make for a clearer report and would allow the council then to determine at the appropriate time with the appropriate information then whether to place this on the ballot or to adopt it, and perhaps more importantly to determine what position it wants to take, if any, with respect to the initiative. So those are my comments.
Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you. So what I'll do is modify the motion. What I gave staff was Roman numeral 1, 2, and 3, with the assumption that staff would fill in the detail. So Vice Mayor Jensen has just filled in the detail for a lot of those. The only one I question is the last one regarding business and employment, especially questions regarding Netflix. Netflix, I'm not sure they're even a party to this. They're just a tenant on the property. And so I'll leave it to staff and legal counsel to know what information we're entitled to and what's really irrelevant, because it's not, it's like asking what the income is of the family that's going to live in a house. I mean, it's the house the land use that we're talking about here, but I'll let you work that out. But I'm happy to incorporate all of the A's, 1s, and little a's under my Roman numerals 1, 2, and 3.
Mr. Manager.
Yes. I did hear the convergence between the motion and the specifics provided by the Vice Mayor, and I think it does all fall under the high-level 3 Roman numerals. The only one I find problematic is we can certainly ask for lease agreements, but those are private party agreements. We have no way to command them.
So if I may, Mr. Mayor, it's fine with me. It's not particularly fine, but I understand the concern with respect to specific information regarding Netflix. However, because a major part of this initiative has been Netflix, then it seems appropriate to ask in a report what that impact is. However, if there's some law out there or case ruling or some such that says that we're not entitled to that information, I still think it's important for us to get, because this is a 4-building office complex, and 2 of which are, as I understand, are going to be occupied by Netflix, 2 of which are going to be occupied by, I don't know, then it's still important to understand what the impact is under number 5 on attracting and retaining business and employment.
And we will certainly pursue it as part of the motion. It's just it will be contingent on the private party signers of the lease agreement to release that information to us. We will certainly make the ask of both parties at council direction.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
As the second of the motion, can I ask the maker of the motion to repeat the specifics that were
taped?
I agree that this is an appropriate way to devise an impact analysis report that will allow us to take the next step in the process. But I also assume that there may be some issues that are raised that as you do discovery, we may find that there are legal ramifications that would prevent that. So when the report comes back, it should also indicate each of those as well, so that so we are congruent with the request that was made as part of the motion and that was enhanced by the Vice Mayor.
And certainly the one other area that was raised about employment, we will be sure to identify the source of information, because I do worry some of the questions might require some speculation, and in a highly charged political environment, that's not a place staff typically ventures because of fear that it could be moving towards advocacy. So we will be very conservative on anything that would take speculation on what a prospective future might be, and we will be as fact-based as possible in answering all of the questions.
I guess I'll call on myself. I would like to see included in the report some specifics of land use policy when an initiative like this has been or was been circulated in another area, and the council and the planning commission were removed from a good part of the process for 7 years, and what was the result. I would like to see specifics on the square footage, the bridge between the two buildings. I don't know if that was included in what Vice Mayor Jensen said, but in addition to what she said, I have no idea if this building is going to be the original 485,000 square feet plus a bridge, which could be another 100,000 square feet, which is far above what the council had initially approved. And I would like to see some specifics on the economic benefits. Vice Mayor Jensen addressed the traffic impact fees and the construction fees. I would like to see evaluation of the easements, the 2.8 acres, see how much those are really worth, somewhere between 0 and what? An actual appraisal of that would be nice. And again, to reiterate the Vice Mayor's comments, you know, the economic benefits, the differences between the two projects, the one approved by council and the one proposed in the initiative. And I think that's everything I have at this time. Mr. Brzezinski.
Thank you, Mr. Leonardis. To focus on what I need, it's really to differentiate the actual council decision and the complete council decision, because it seems like that needs to be actually clearly outlined, because there were some issues in relationship to changes that might be made, that could be made at the level of staff. That was part of the decision. So we need to know exactly more than a reminder. We need to know exactly what we decided. And then I want to know how the proposed changes that are evident in the initiative relate to that. Because my concern is that are there some unintended consequences that would occur? And I think the issue of what our public is asking for is clarity, so that they can make an informed decision. I heard that so many times tonight. Our public wants to make an informed decision. They want to make it on the basis of fact. And so it's our obligation to allow that to happen, to enable that to happen by the kind of explanation that we can give that really outlines the facts in this matter at this time. And I think everything that the Vice Mayor offered is part of that, but the primary issue is the eventual leading to a good statement so that the public can make a choice in June to either vote for the initiative or vote against the initiative, but based on fact and based on the totality of the reality of what we're looking at right now. Because this is a unique situation. We haven't done this before. And I do think that it would be very important that this report come specifically to that as a target for us to reach at the end of this.
Mr. Mayor, staff will be looking for if the individual comments being made by the mayor and Councilman Brzezinski are part of the motion as well. I did want to comment certainly on the difference in authority by staff and the council. I thought that was addressed in the prior overarching action. The square footage difference, the economic benefit differences, I think, have been addressed. The only new issue that I didn't see in the macro motion that was made was doing a comparison to other jurisdictions that have gone through a similar process. Partially I'm concerned about because doing that analysis presumes, what's the attorney statement, evidence that's not, in fact, we don't know yet. The council approved the plan development a year ago, and the Albright project would never be coming back to council because you already approved it. You're done with it. So similarly, once the voters approve, if they so choose, it would never go back to the voters or the council unless there were changes proposed. Then those, adding residential or something like that. For the current council-approved project would have to go back to council. Adding residential to the ballot measure project would have to go back for a subsequent approval. So I think trying to do that analysis compared to other jurisdictions is a unique dynamic that I'm not sure how we'd handle that yet. But if it's what the council want, we'll do our best.
Councilmember McNabb.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. I was actually waiting to get attention to address that very thing, and that is that I do believe that the mayor's specific items and Mr. Brzezinski's more general comments were included in the motion. At least that would be my intention, with the exception of possibly valuation of easement. To me, that would fall under the is anything different in terms of money kind of thing. And then secondly, I really do not see a lot of value in trying to do research on other initiatives like this because although I've not done the research, as I said earlier, this is an odd duck, and I don't think we're going to find a whole lot of those out there. So I think we should not try to be looking around and feeling reassured or horrified depending on what we find in other communities, because it's going to be such a different situation. It's not going to line up properly. So I would not include that in my motion. But otherwise, I think everything else that's been set up here on the dais is included in the motion, if that makes it clear and comfortable for staff.
I'll call on myself. Part of my interest is because someone brought up sovereignty of government. Government has the power to police, the government has the power to tax. These are things that can't be taken away. And I was concerned about precedents set with other initiatives that would take away the government's sovereignty for a period of 7 years, if that was something that could even be legal in a land use matter for a specific period of time. Cases that were previously ruled upon. And I realize that there is the argument that the initiative process trumps all, but there's the argument that if someone wanted to build a brick wall down the middle of Los Gatos and have East Los Gatos and West Los Gatos, and they got 1,896 signatures, could they just do that? And I think there are limitations like yelling fire in a crowded building. So I was interested in the legal analysis of, can an initiative take away 5 elected council members' voices for a period of time? So maybe I'm the only one thinking that way right now. Another question I have while I have the microphone open here is, what is the current status of Los Gatos? We are still a cross-complainant in the lawsuit. Is that correct? Am I using the correct terminology?
We're actually defendant.
We are defendant. So I guess here we are, we're going to be preparing a report for an initiative that removes us from a lawsuit if this initiative passes. What are the ramifications of that, if any?
As to your first question, is that that's different than how you framed the first question. We can put in the report the legal analysis of the legality of doing an initiative of this sort. And there are plenty of cases out there on development initiatives, and so we can provide that background for you. That's different than doing a type of research as to initiatives in other cities and how they passed and how they look after the election. That's completely different than just a legal analysis of the legality of this type of ordinance. And as to your second question, we're still able to do the report regardless of the fact that the litigation's ongoing.
Okay. And specifically, for a specific period of time, it would be of interest to me. In this case, it would be 7 years. Further discussion? Vice Mayor.
I just want to make sure that I understand that the motion we have now on the floor does not include the other jurisdiction comparison. Is that correct?
Correct.
But that would the maker of the motion consider the legal analysis that's just been outlined by Mr. Schultz?
I just assumed that would be a standard part of staff's report anyway.
Seconder? Yes?
Absolutely.
Further discussion? All right, seeing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, none. Passes unanimously. This meeting is now adjourned.
Oops.
Budget
Vice
referral?
Mayor wants to say something.
Vice Mayor has something to say before we adjourn.
Do we need to make a motion to direct staff to prepare the required budget adjustment as part of our mid-year budget review? Or do that in March?
You could address it proactively on the 18th. The big question will be the level of election expense the council wishes to budget for.
Okay.
All right, now we're adjourned.